across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Small talk, tough talk, cross talk, across the nation.
But I think this is absolutely outrageous, and I'm sorry to say that not enough people are outraged by it.
This is Talk.
They have this stuff poured down their throats every single day.
Straight talking and straight to the point.
Why are you answering questions that no one asked?
There's no place like it.
I don't know why that wouldn't be the number one thing you do.
Direct from the dormitory of diatribe.
Nobody wants to think they are nuts. Nobody wants to think they're losing the plot.
Turn on, tune in, speak out.
I just don't like politicians telling me to tighten my belt.
Well-informed conversation across the nation.
We cannot, as a country, carry on like this.
Critical judgment and laser-guided opinion.
And there is the thumping dilemma.
Get the very best conversation on DAB+, online, on the app, or watch on your connected TV. This is Talk. Double talk, fast talk, wise talk, every day.
Who do you trust with the most precious thing in a democracy? Truth.
This is Talk.
Well, as they say in Casablanca, welcome to the fight. This time I know we will win.
Galactic-sized conversation on all the issues that matter to you.
This is not going to solve any of the problems that we're talking about on this programme.
High-performing entertainment, off-road opinions.
The home of common sense. If you've got an opinion, give it to us, right? Educate me, educate the rest of the world. It's about a democracy. It's about having your say. It's not about offending.
Well-informed conversation across the nation.
This is ridiculous, people. This is absolute madness. It needs to stop.
Straight talking and straight to the point.
Listen, we're the home of free speech here. People say things, you counter it, you call in and say what you want to say.
Get the very best conversation on DAB+, online, on the app, or watch on your connected TV. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
And good afternoon. Yeah, what could go wrong? Nothing at all. There's like a little technical hitch. It involved a headphone, a microphone, and a spilt glass of milk, quite literally. Welcome to the home of common sense. Thank you to Julia Hartley-Brewer. Back tomorrow, of course, right here on Talk. So the BBC Director General Tim Davie and News Chief Deborah Turnis, as you will have heard less than 24 hours ago, had to walk the plank after it was revealed that Panorama doctored Trump's January the 6th speech. Earlier today, the chairman, Samir Shada, said there's been more than 500 complaints and admits the edit gave the impression of a direct call for violent action. He's now apologised, but what next for the BBC? How do they regain your trust? Also this afternoon, the Home Office has earmarked 14 new sites to house up to 10,000 migrants. They look at this like it's some kind of success. Shabina Mahmood, the Home Secretary, is attempting to mirror Denmark's tougher model, but ministers have suggested that offering £100 a week to get people out of hotels. That's on top of the £49.18 they already received. This leaves taxpayers, of course, to pick up the bill once again. And councils, as you've been hearing with Julia, are pleading poverty while splashing out vanity on vanity projects. Blackpool, I mean, seriously, they blew £35,500 on Pride zebra crossings, despite being £570 million in debt. Whoever gave that whoever signed that off should be fired. They should probably be in jail for a criminal waste of taxpayers' money. There's many more of those. One council, by the way, told constituents they'd have to wait 103 years for potholes to be repaired. You can't make this kind of guff up. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. How do the BBC regain your trust? There is the question. The BBC are up to their necks in it right now. Are there any defences left for the BBC? There's one question. From Bashir to Trump, Gaza to Rowling, there's now a solid body of evidence that something is very wrong over there at the state-funded broadcaster. There are some peculiar quirks to this story as well. I tell you what the biggest quirks are to me. Tim Davie, the head of Director General, has had to walk after many years at the BBC. He wasn't a mad lefty, this fellow. He was actually a die-hard conservative. But I know that doesn't mean what it used to mean, but you take the point. The former head of Westminster wasn't a mad lefty. He was probably more right than Nigel Farage. In fact, the left argue that the BBC is a cesspit of right-wing nonsense. Remember Alistair Campbell absolutely losing his mind, never stopped wanging on about the Brexit Broadcasting Company. If you look at social media, the BBC are constantly accused of whitewashing genocide in Gaza and siding with Israel. But simultaneously, many accusations of pushing Hamas lies around the world on multiple occasions. Can you work this confused picture out? Matt, there was a great one when I was looking into this. The BBC did what they thought was obviously some amazing, groundbreaking report when they discovered that insurance companies were charging non-white people more for their insurance. And this all kind of blew, wow, we've really, this is sort of Pulitzer Prize, or the broadcasting equivalent of Pulitzer Prize territory. We're going to win stuff with this amazing revelation. It turned out to be a crock of old shizzle from start to finish. There was nothing in it. It couldn't be corroborated. It couldn't be stood up. And in fact, within a relatively short period of time, the BBC had to take it down, saying it didn't meet our editorial standards. No, because it was BS, mate. It was made up. The problem is this. This is how I see it, OK? There's not some kind of management directive. There's no management there going, right, BBC, or you take this stance on this stance on that, be as left-wing as you like, but just don't say it out loud. That isn't happening. What is happening is that there are individuals and some lazy and, frankly, slightly crazy, what they call line managers, who are not, frankly, checking the homework. I mean, that's broadly what it comes down to. And they often do this subconsciously, and in many respects, that's kind of worse, because it suggests that their bias is actually embedded within them. So they're not seeing what everybody else can see. Oh, look, Jemima's come up with a very worthy piece about, well, the aforementioned insurance company. Isn't that great? Yeah. Never bothering to stop to wonder that just because of a certain set of stats, and remember, the one thing I've learned about this world, and certainly this job, and I think it's aided by social media, more so in the last couple of years than ever before, is that you can construct and make an argument on anything you want. If you really want to go there, you can do. And then, of course, there's the independent production companies who seem to be left to self-edit. The two biggest crimes lately over there at the BBC have been the Gaza documentary, where they got the son of a terrorist to present it. Nobody checked. And then, of course, the Trump thing as well. And that's really interesting, because on the Trump one, they're more fascinating than anything, nobody still has complained how they ended up in this position. And the strangest thing about this story is they didn't need to splice it together. If you wanted to show that Trump might have encouraged people to gather and fight at the Capitol building, just play the whole speech. Now, I get it. He didn't actually say you've got to go out there and riot and all that kind of stuff. But at least the BBC could have sensibly and editorially suggested that he did. They could then have said, look, here's a montage showing the kind of things that Mr. Trump said. But they didn't even do that. They actually edited pieces together into a complete sentence, a sentence that was never said or uttered. I'm going to remind you of this again, because it's just too gobsmacking to ignore. You can't really hear this enough, and if you want to know the centre of gravity for this BBC story, it's right here. Have a listen.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and I'll be there with you, and we fight. We fight like hell. We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women.
There it is. I mean, that was put together, the first one you heard there, quite clearly, to show a complete sentence. There's various ways. If they wanted to create a montage, then a voiceover could have said, have a listen to a selection of some of the things Mr. Trump said. You can then put what they call a flash in between each section. You can put a sound effect. You can slide the picture. They made this look like a complete sentence, and no one yet has explained why they went there. You could argue, you could say, look, you know, we think when we watch Trump's speech that he was tacitly, at least tacitly, encouraging people to get down there to the Capitol building and kick off. You could argue that point. I know you could argue the other point as well. But you take what I'm saying here. But they didn't have to do that. But they did. And no one said otherwise. So with all of this in mind, and we haven't even got into the trans stuff and other issues surrounding the editorial imbalance at the BBC, how do they regain your trust? 0344 499 1000. Let's get a word on this from Alan Miller, co-founder of the Together Declaration, and the other big stories of the day. Afternoon to you, Alan.
Good afternoon, Ian.
I'll tell you what, it's a flipping mess, isn't it, over there at Beeb HQ. It's worth, just before we kick off, Alan, a quick reminder of the CEO, former CEO of BBC News, Deborah Turnis. This was her speaking this morning after she was forced to walk the plank.
I would like to say it has been the privilege of my career to serve as the CEO of BBC News and to work with our brilliant team of journalists. I stepped down over the weekend because the buck stops with me. But I'd like to make one thing very clear. BBC News is not institutionally biased. That's why it's the world's most trusted news provider.
Well, I'm not sure about that anymore, Alan. The world's most trusted news provider. She was widely seen, by the way, as being massively out of her depth on this job, but I think that last line is worth some comment.
It's remarkable, isn't it, Ian? Because we've seen everything from what we're told is this climate emergency that constantly we're presented with this Armageddon and doom-laden scenarios by the BBC to how the coverage of lockdowns and lots of the impositions were done then, mandatory jabs for workers, digital ID, cheerleading, let's have it longer, faster, more intense, rather than asking deep, difficult questions. Investigative journalism seems to be jettisoned to more tabloid-style responses, but very partisan. So we know that the concerns that the country have got around things like ESG, environmental, societal and governance, and DEI have dominated the outlook of perspective of many of the leading proponents at the BBC. We know that the BBC said that people who are protesting against ULEZ were far right, and then they had to retract that, said, well, someone had a jacket that had an image of Sadiq Khan with a little tash. And somehow they extrapolated from that because they were saying he was equivalent to a dictator, that everyone that was there was far right. The sort of things that if you have journalistic standards of objectivity, you don't do. And then we haven't seen anything quite like this since Orgreave, but like where actual footage gets edited and chopped, and so blatantly so that then becomes apparent around the President Trump and making it look like he was inciting something when actually it was very different. That is beyond just having a sort of activist political position, which is bad enough. That is akin to completely misrepresenting everything and trying to present someone as being in the dock for something. And then, of course, we've seen that with reporting around Gaza. We've seen it also with the questions around trans. And I think what the public is so concerned about is that something that used to be seen as Lord Reith, to inform, educate and entertain, is now being seen as a bastion of activism. And a very political view. And I think it's really important, the questions about, well, what does this mean for the BBC? Is it enough for Tim Davie and Deborah Turnis to quit? Or this is something institutionally? She says it's not. But across the board, if you look at the programming, if you look at the positions often taken, I think the public's very concerned with this, how things are represented, and questions around should it be just funded or should it be commercial? Those are really important questions for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that Trump clip I'm going to talk about for the rest of my life, Alan, to be honest, because I can't believe that when they put that together, and there would have been, I would confidently say, at least 3 people in the room when it was physically put together. That doesn't account for the various other people afterwards, an editor, producer, an editor, and because it's Panorama, one would assume probably a lawyer would have had to look over an episode like that and make sure it was all legally savvy and all the rest of it. But back to when they first put it together, at least one person in that room would have gone, can we get away with this? They would have known, is my point. Somebody, you couldn't, as an experienced journalist, put that together and not have realised you were up to something dodgy.
Absolutely. I mean, I've spent time in the edit suite working on documentaries that have gone out with PBS and others around the world. And the thing is, it's meticulously done. And even at a 24-hour news cycle, look, mistakes can be made. They can be genuine mistakes. This is something where they've laboured over the edit. They've thought about how to do something and present it. This has been constructed. It's not just something that's just kind of, we got all this footage in, it was all happening on the spot, we couldn't quite see it. This is something where you step back and you evaluate something and you edit it to present a certain argument. It's so shocking, and it really makes us, I think the only good thing about all of this is that it's getting the public to really see that on a number of issues, it has not been about objectively reporting, from the questions that have been asked at those press releases, at those press conferences, all the way through COVID, all the way through those situations to contemporary coverage on all these issues. We're not getting fair, balanced interrogation, journalistic standards that we would expect. And, many people still watch the BBC. On my mum's street, it's the go-to thing that people are watching. And it really is very concerning. And, I think that that's why people should actually have their voices heard. They should let the BBC know from them. People should actually say, because we've seen right the way throughout that there hasn't been even coverage on a lot of these issues, like the questions we're still faced with around digital ID, around net zero, around all these questions.
Well, I think the BBC is kind of like the Labour Party and the Tory Party, really. That sort of status quo thing. I think the Stonewall inclusion of sort of LGBT stuff, Alan, is quite telling, because they came along, loads of corporations just went, oh yeah, Stonewall, yeah, they did amazing work in the 70s and 80s about gay rights, and we all applaud them for that. They did fantastic stuff, and then they realised they'd run out of road and had nothing else to do, so they turned their attention to the whole LGBT stuff, particularly with an emphasis on the T. And companies just rolled over and said, oh yeah, we'll go with this. And I think Stephen Nolan might have made a documentary, actually, but critical. I think the idea was to look at the impact that Stonewall had, almost dictating for some editorial policy on the bit. And of course, people in newsrooms will go, well, it's Stonewall, they can't possibly be wrong. And it's that status quo thinking, like we do in this country with immigration, like we do with the NHS. It's like, well, this is how it's been, these are the go-to people that know better, it's not for us to question them, rather than thinking outside the box and saying, hang on, something doesn't add up here. And there's one or two voices that we've heard of from the BBC, people usually no longer there, who actually said, no, actually, this is the fundamental problem. They have a kind of groupthink mentality. They are wedded to certain narratives and they can't get out of it. The idea that they might be wrong is simply not a discussion point.
Well, it's very true. I mean, the thing about Stonewall is that they actually ended up rounding on the people that were the very founders that worked so hard for so long, for decades, to get a situation where you could get treated equally and fairly, and then, for being gay in Britain, and then they got basically hounded out, but they were very good as activists at getting into institutions, not just at the BBC, but a lot of institutions across society. The problem is, at the BBC, they didn't have a culture of critical analysis and evaluation and asking questions. It's central. That must be the central position for journalistic standards. It's got to be the starting point.
100%. And then they did it with, organised it, like the Muslim Brotherhood was another one. They thought, oh yeah, the Muslim, they sound like a bunch of chaps. Let's run everything past them. And without anybody stopping to go, hang on, are these the right people? It's the same way that institutions function. The reason why Paula Vennell's got a gig at the post office was because she'd been perpetually employed in high position without anyone stopping to go, is she any good? And it's that kind of strange, wonky thinking that is existing. And in this case, of course, it's existing in the national broadcaster. And of course, that becomes, you know, a little more concerning, because this is the people that are meant to be giving us impartial news, even if you don't like Strictly and, you know, whatever else they might, Doctor Who. But their news is meant to be the bastion, and that's meant to be the kind of the bench level, if you like, the litmus test of truth. Alan, stay with us. We've got more to talk about. That is, of course, Alan Miller, co-founder of the Together Declaration, chewing the fat over the big stories of the day. Comments on all of this. The BBC, how do they regain your trust? Is that even possible now? Lines are open. 0344 499 1000 is where you leave a voice note as well, and you can message 87222.
You can see in the way he's speaking that he's concerned about where our world is going, both domestically and internationally. But where I would respectfully disagree with him, we do step forward when other nations hesitate. We're not there yet, but as I touched on earlier, the world is getting more dangerous, not less. And we're not moving fast enough to recognize what is coming over the hill. So I hope today is that day of reflection. But I'd also say that whilst we're having our challenges now, they're no different from ones we've had in the past, that we've been able to...
Coming this December, our talkTV app is...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
It is Talk. We've got Alan Miller with us, co-founder of the Together Declaration. Loads of comment company. We'll come to those emails. We don't do emails. Messages and texts shortly. Alan, let's move on to this story. Keir Starmer's Britain is still pouring billions into migrant hotels. This is costing, of course, around about 5-6 million quid a day. We seem to lose... I mean, these are jaw-dropping numbers, and we just sort of say them out loud because we got so used to them. However, ministers, despite that, are now toying with the idea of 100 quid weekly stipends to get migrants to leave hotels. Let's have a listen to the Prime Minister speaking about hotels just a few weeks ago. Here's what Keir Starmer had to say.
We inherited a huge mess in relation to pretty well all departments in government, and that includes the Home Office. If you take the issue of asylum hotels, for example, we had years under the previous government where they didn't process claims. So tens of thousands of people didn't have their claims processed. They were then housed in hotels. That was the policy of the last government. There were 400 at the height of it. It's now about 200. I'm determined that we will close those hotels. We're processing the claims much more quickly, and where people have got no right to be in our country, we're removing them at a higher rate than the best part of a decade. So we're taking the action, but I can't tell you how frustrated and angry I am that we've been left with a mess as big as this by the last government.
A big mess by the last government. Easy to do that, but he has been there a year and a half now, Alan. He's a third of the way through his time at Downing Street. That's significant. But £100 extra cash to get people. What are they going to do? Where are these people going to go with an extra £100?
Well, this is the question. So £100 plus the £50 or so that they get already part of the taxpayer money. The idea is that you go to a family or friend or somewhere in the community. I mean, listen, £5.5 million a day or £2 billion a year. It's an enormous amount of money. So at one level, people might say, well, this is better financially, but it raises the question, of course, which a lot of people have been asking, what after the hotels, right? Are they going to be barracks? Are they going to be HMOs? What do people think about that in the community in the first place? There's also the putting forward of the idea that you pay £3,000 to those that will go back to their country. So they come in illegally and then you give them £3,000. They sort of cite the Danish example, I think it was from Denmark, where they offered £24,000 equivalent to go back to Syria after Assad. The idea that we're having to offer incentives, cash incentives with British taxpayers' money to people that have come in illegally into Britain raises enormous questions, right? About border control. Is there any intention to stop the things happening at the border, not just with the small boats, but across the board? Is there a political will and commitment to do it? Is it just rhetoric? And then the question about those that there are genuine asylum seekers, so they need to be processed properly by the Home Office. But then the vast majority of people that are coming in, over 30,000 people already in this year, what that actually means. And people have grave concerns, not just of the money, but then the idea that then they're going to go to other areas. We know in Crowborough and other parts of the country, people are very concerned, Inverness and elsewhere, about military barracks, particularly when we got veterans who are homeless. But also then the question, how much should we be paying for that? But then what's it mean? In HMOs, there's enormous costs as well. And what it means for the communities, what it means for things like schools, playgrounds. We've seen a host of terrible things, unspeakable things in the last few months. We've seen stabbings and murders, and we've seen sexual assaults and attacks. This isn't going to get solved by trying to say, well, we'll just, rather than paying £145 a night, which is an enormous amount of money, we'll give you £100 and you just go into this area. There's a financial question, and there's also the question of what that means for everyone. And this is why Labour's under so much problems. It's not going to get resolved by Keir getting replaced if that happens. There's obviously a revolt looking like it may happen. It certainly looks like he could be gone by May with the council elections. I think people are going to vote heavily on that. But this needs to get addressed with political will, with a sense of this is what we're going to do. And actually, without borders, you can't have democracy. Without a nation state, all those things about liberty, privacy, rights, freedom, you need the integrity of a nation to be able to implement them. And that also raises questions for the ECHR and what it means for our abilities legally, but also how we address that now. So these are really big issues for Britain.
Yeah, 100%. There's a lot of things in this world in the 21st century we can sort out. We can do amazing things with technology. We have AI. Elon Musk can not just launch a rocket, he can make it reverse back into its pod. Extraordinary times, but we can't stop blokes coming over on a rubber dinghy on the channel. I mean, you can't make this nonsense up.
And they won't be stopped, of course, by digital ID. And what we've got, Ian, whilst this is all going, is we were presented really at the start of this that digital ID is going to stop the boats. Yep. When people ridiculed that, suddenly it was going to be making things efficient or just so you didn't have to go into your drawer and get documents out. Now we're being told that 8 million directors are being forced from the 18th of November. We've got a big open letter and a petition and campaign, not just to stop directors with the one login system, 8 million of them, but also 1.8 million veterans to not be used as guinea pigs. We just saw Remembrance Day. We're with a lot of veterans. A lot of them are campaigning against that with us. And also for our children not to be put on digital ID. They've used this very hot potato issue, which they need to get a grip of politically with commitment and will and deal with borders, but to weaponise the whole discussion about digital ID, then to force it down the road with directors. This is of grave concern, because what we've just seen with the BBC and what we're seeing with our institutions are activists that are hell-bent on making sure that people think a certain way and behave a certain way and do as you're told. They'll even change reality in the news to try and make that happen. And the idea then that we've got a state that's got these institutions and that's also got this view that's going to implement a state biometric surveillance control system is really very un-British, and we need to all challenge that and not let it happen.
We will, yeah, we're certainly not going to keep our eyes off that one over the next couple of years. Alan, thank you as ever. Alan Miller joining us on the programme, co-founder of the Together Declaration. Make sure you look up what they're all about. Comment from you. We are going to speak to David Elstein in a second, former BBC exec, also former chief executive of Channel 5, knows his way around a newsroom and a TV channel, that's for sure. And John Mayer, former BBC producer, joins us as well. How do we regain trust in the BBC? Where are the fundamentals here? Where has it gone wrong? Big perception that this has gone too left. Of course, the interesting thing, and I've for years wondered this, people on the left consider the BBC to be a mouthpiece for the Conservative Party or for the right, pro-Israel, pro-Brexit, those kind of views. I know, you can't make it up, but that is a view. 0344 499 1000, 1:30. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Download the new Talk app. Make sure you do that, because the Talk TV app won't exist, so it's the Talk app you need to look for, Google Play or your App Store. The BBC absolutely skewered, of course, as Director General quits. The CEO of News also gone. Panorama caught in that doctoring scandal of Trump's January the 6th speech. Years of scandal, some say. Woke bias seems to be the phrase of the day. From Gaza coverage to trans rows to Gary Lineker's politics have torched trust. How do they regain trust? Let's have a listen, though, to the now former CEO of News, Deborah Turnis, speaking this morning.
I would like to say it has been the privilege of my career to serve as the CEO of BBC News and to work with our brilliant team of journalists. I stepped down over the weekend because the buck stops with me. But I'd like to make one thing very clear. BBC News is not institutionally biased. That's why it's the world's most trusted news provider.
And it's that last point that really is in question in terms of the future credibility of the BBC. Let's get a word firstly with David Elstein, former BBC executive producer and, of course, chair of Open Democracy, also head honcho over there at Channel 5. David, your CV is there for all to see. You know your way around a TV channel and a newsroom. What has gone wrong here? I mean, Deborah there saying, look, we're not institutionally biased, but that's certainly the accusation that's being put to them at the moment. Good afternoon to you.
Hi. It's slightly unfortunate because deep down she's right. There isn't some kind of embedded conspiracy inside the BBC. This is our agenda already and stuff. Unfortunately, the way the BBC recruits means that there's what we these days call groupthink, where people conform to the views of the people around them. And we know that this is true because there have been investigations in the past. Andrew Marr wrote an interesting report about bias in the BBC, and he just called it a general liberal bias. It was why the BBC was so unrepresentative of UK thinking over something like leaving the EU. And what the Prescott report assembled, and the chairman is quite right today to say that he's assembled it from internal reports within the BBC's editorial complaints process, or editorial standards process, is what could be seen as a pattern of events. 5 or 6 different things where the BBC got its emphasis wrong on climate, on race, on Gaza, on Trump, and most recently on Martin Croxall. Well, that's after the event. And that looks like a pattern of behaviour. I suspect it's just lazy groupthink for the most part. And the great majority of BBC journalists are dead straight and do their job well. But the BBC is a very large organisation. It's really difficult to keep standards within it. And on this occasion, they have failed not just once, but half a dozen times.
Indeed. And of course, you know, it's difficult, isn't it? Because there are people on the left who think that the BBC... I mean, I remember Alistair Campbell losing his mind over Brexit, thinking, you know, this is the Brexit Broadcasting Company. He was perturbed by the amount of times Farage showed up on Question Time. But conversely to that, when I worked at the BBC, I mean, I remember working with a senior editor, David, who was incredibly sort of Corbynite kind of left-wing. You would never, ever know that through her work. She left it at the door. She was always absent. She was the most forthright person in the room at getting right-wing voices on to balance out what had gone on. And I think that probably does replicate what most journalists do. However, as you, there's a sort of an underpinning. I don't know, maybe we need a psychologist to get to the bottom of this sort of, as Marr said, this kind of liberal bias where perhaps things that would in any other place get checked, get a little bit of a free pass. And of course, when it becomes cumulative, and when you add it all up, you have this rather grim picture that we're looking at today.
Yeah, but what you've also got to look at here is thousands and thousands of hours of output every day and a few minutes that are then complained about or assembled into a dossier. Now, what the BBC did wrong in above all in this matter was it was so slow to respond publicly.
Yeah.
That dossier has been floating around for 5 or 6 months. When the Telegraph finally got hold of a copy last week, they should have known exactly what they wanted to say. Quite a bit of it is in Samir Shah's letter today. Too little, too late. And by the time he got round to writing that letter, he'd lost his chief executive and he'd lost his chief of news, and it was all entirely unnecessary. Back in May or June, all they had to do was say, oops, we've got this panorama thing wrong, we're going to take it off air, correct the edit, put it back on, because broadly the programme's okay. We've got another half dozen issues, and we've set up a committee internally to deal with all of those one by one and check whether there's a pattern. End of. They didn't do it, and they're paying the price.
Absolutely. Can they get out of this? Can trust be regained at the BBC?
Well, look, I think David Turnus is slightly exaggerating the point, claiming the BBC is the most trusted media brand around. It's a bit more trusted than most, but not a lot. There's widespread disillusion with the BBC in a lot of age groups. It's not what it was. And restoring that trust, for me, in the end, comes back to an issue of accountability. Only when the BBC is truly accountable to its audiences, TV and radio, will its journalism, like its general output, finally lift itself out of the curse of the licence fee. But as long as the BBC is not really accountable to anyone, not to you, not to me, not to the other licence fee payers, not to the DCMS committee and Caroline Delich, not to the government, not even to Ofcom particularly, it's seen as a law unto itself, and that is not good for it.
Yeah, spot on. David, great to speak. Thank you, sir. David Elstein, former BBC executive producer, chair of Open Democracy. John Mayer joins us, former BBC producer, who's helped us out before on these kind of curious dilemmas for the BBC. I know you're a big supporter of the BBC, John. It was previously your home, work home, as it were. But this is a mess, isn't it? I mean, no matter how loyal you might be, this is a royal mess and a huge problem for the state broadcaster.
It's not state broadcaster for a start, Ian. It is a mess. But look, let's look beyond the headlines. Were Tim Davie and Deborah Turner stitched up? Were they stitched up by a group of right-wing governors who stopped them speaking? Apparently, they wanted to come out and speak last Tuesday, and they weren't allowed to. And it's only today that Samir Shah has said anything. So, this is a conspiracy, but, if Trump, Johnson, and the Telegraph are on one side, I'm on the other one, I'm afraid, on this one.
But aren't you sort of highlighting the problem there instinctively because the Telegraph said it, therefore I'm not going to believe them, but I'm going to believe what the BBC said, regardless of whether they're right or wrong. So that's bias, isn't it? You're biased, John, aren't you?
Telegraph has 2 stories every day about this BBC. One of them is...
And they did the same with the expenses, and thank goodness they did, because the BBC weren't there.
They did. But you have to ask, why did everybody take so long to react? David has just said, look, in May they had this report, they should have reacted then. And the Trump edit is indefensible. You can't defend that. That's just fraud. So they should have said, we made a mistake on this, and then appoint a committee for the other things. So, there's 5,000 and 6,000 journalists in the BBC, and they're not all dishonest. One or two of them. You've got Bashir coming down the track, by the way. There's a new book about Martin Bashir and Diana. Mm-hmm. That'll occupy you for the next week or two. And one thing I do believe is BBC Verify, they've made their own trap in that. It's such a silly idea.
Yeah.
Because what you're saying in BBC Verify is, look, this bit is true, the rest of the news is not true.
Yeah. But of course, when the BBC gets something wrong, it's writ large everywhere. It's in neon lights, it's in highlighter pen, it's all over. It might as well be in a billboard in Las Vegas. They are held to a certain standard, not just domestically but globally. And of course, with issues such as what is happening in the Middle East, over 200, I think, areas where they've had to correct themselves, BBC Arabic being at the centre of all of that. I mean, these are not just little issues. They sound like systemic problems in that area.
Look, I mean, the Middle East Gaza reporting, as far as I can see, the BBC has been pretty fair on Gaza. Remember, they're not allowed into Gaza, which is pretty disgusting. No international broadcasters allowed into Gaza, and they haven't kicked up a fuss about that. No, I mean, look, there's always two sides, and the Israeli propaganda machine is very, very, very good. They don't need a BBC. They've got their foreign minister and assistant foreign minister who comes on the telly and tells lies, and they've got Danny Cohen working for them here. This is an absolute minefield. And look, Tim Davie, of the last 4 or 5 director generals, 4 of them have been taken out of the building in a coffin, or having a coffin prepared for them. What a job! Who would take the job? Tim did it very well. But, one thing is it's going to end in failure, and you're going to end going out the door. Only Mark Thompson is left with any glory.
We've just had this breaking news, John. Donald Trump threatening legal action against the BBC. He's confirmed the BBC have confirmed it has received a letter from the US president threatening a legal case. Of course, he's tried this in the US as well. What do you make of it?
I saw that, Ian. And Samir Shah got up 2 minutes before that and said, as far as I know, Donald Trump is not suing us. Now, where's the communication? Samir Shah was
obviously the chairman didn't know, but the BBC have now confirmed they've received a letter from Donald Trump.
By the way, let Trump sue, because that's what he's done in America. He shut people up by suing them. And that's his modus operandi. We don't work like that in this country, and somebody should tell him that.
How did the BBC regain trust, do you think, John? Because they've certainly lost it, whether you like it or not.
Well, it's a hard thing to regain. The way I always say it regains trust is to make good programmes, true programmes, which people want to watch. And when it's done, look at traitors, look at anything like that, away from the news. But where do you go when you want a big national event? When you want to know what's happening, you go to the BBC and you go to BBC News. You don't come to talk, I'm afraid, Ian.
Well, you'd be surprised. Those numbers continue to grow. Listen, John, thank you. Nice to have you on, as ever. John Mayer, former BBC producer, with his fairly defensive view on the BBC. I think something bigger, if you had to widen this out a bit, I think something bigger is going on. I think there is a distrust of news more generally, and the BBC is the more kind of prominent player in the pack. And there is clear, strong evidence that when the BBC have got it wrong, some of these are howlers. You can forgive somebody getting a name wrong, or an editor. Every now and again you're watching the news, and it can happen here, it can happen anywhere. And there's somebody, a CEO of a big oil company, and the CEO starts speaking on the screen, and the strap, as they call it at the bottom, says Ryland Clark, presenter. And you think, that's not Ryland Clark. That's just an error in live news, OK? We all kind of forgive that. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about Panorama. The case of the Gaza kid, the Hamas relative who presented the documentary. I think, was that also Panorama, wasn't it? Was that another Panorama? I think it might have been. Either way, whatever it was, doesn't matter. These are big. These are big errors. They're glaring errors that it would have taken very senior people to deliberately ignore. That's what we're dealing with here. This is not something that could have gone, oh, we didn't notice that, or we didn't notice you'd wrongly attributed a quote to somebody, but the name was the same and there was some obvious explanation, even though it was a terrible look. You could go, all right, fair enough. A human error. This is not human error. A human decided to give these things a free pass. The Trump thing was given the green light by the BBC. It might have been made by an independent company, but somebody somewhere at the BBC went, yep, that is editorially sound, as the phrase goes. We've looked at it. It's been lawyered. I would imagine anything about the US president and rigged elections would have gone through a lawyer before it got to the TVs. So it's been looked at and checked. That's where the problem is. These are not kind of minor errors or misjudgments. These are deliberate ignoring of truth, fantasy and other issues. 0344 499 1000. How do they regain? Remember, you're paying for this, Lark. How do they regain your trust? Our lines are open. This is Talk. Moving to the
job of the BBC is to present facts.
Yes, but it's difficult, isn't it, when people don't want to face those facts?
No, it's not difficult.
The BBC's job is to say, there are facts over here which aren't so convenient for you. It's got a highest trust recognition of any media organisation.
People don't realise they're being lied to. Their climate coverage is so unscientific and unfact-based, it's a joke. Their pushing of transgender over women's rights, completely unscientific, unmedically proven and dangerous, I would say. Their coverage of Gaza has been, immoral.
Big news.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
This one comes from Chalky in Market Drayton, who says this has been bubbling under for years with the BBC. Corbyn at Glastonbury, Question Time, dodgy audiences, Women's Hour with a parody of itself, the obsession with Gaza, talking about nonsense issues, etc. Yeah, well, the BBC do the classic. And in fairness, they're not alone on this, that when it comes to trying to make yourself relevant, you have to do sort of youth stuff that kids are going to get on board with. Kids don't watch news, by the way, but like the BBC Verify thing, which just become a bit of a joke, and it was kind of fronted by somebody who was about 16, and, someone decided that she was, up there with Barbara Waters instantly. It's that thing that someone, oh God, this person's brilliant because they've had one good idea and it went really well, so therefore we must. I get the idea behind it, but BBC Verify has just got to go in the bin now, hasn't it? Because all the while this is going on, it just looks utterly ridiculous. Paul says, I'm sorry, it was put out in October, weeks before the election, and made Trump out to be inciting violence. It could well have cost him the election. He's quite right to sue, and the BBC are defenceless and guilty. No, it wasn't put out before the election because the Trump speech was about the election, about the result of the election. him denying the result of the election. That's when the speech was, unless Paul is talking about a different speech altogether. But that specific one was January the 6th. This was after, way after the election. But I get it. And one here, Mr. Mayor is absolutely correct. How dare Trump sue the BBC for lying about them? They're the envy of the world, like our NHS, and should be permitted to lie to us all. Yes, good point. How dare we question them? Nick's over here in Horsham. How are you doing, Nick? Good afternoon to you.
Good, thank you, Ian. Nice to talk to you, and thanks for taking my call.
It's a pleasure.
If I may, all I seem to be hearing from the most senior BBC management that have resigned is mistake, human error, oops moments. But there are too many mistakes. There's too much human error. There's too many oops moments. These are major, important world events that people rely on good quality journalism. I would suggest this is more like a series of deliberate mistakes, primarily by activists. It goes uncovered most of the time. They have a dislike of Trump. They didn't like Brexit. They don't like Israel particularly. They don't want to talk about climate. They want to talk about a climate emergency. And I just feel, as I'm sure many people do, just free us from the shackles of the BBC licence fee. Let them get on and publish what the hell they like, but please don't make others continually pay for it. The other thing, Ian, and you probably will know this, and I'm sure I've heard this mentioned a few times, and I may be completely wrong, but I'm pretty sure in the US, as a journalist, you have to declare your allegiance to a political party that you may be supporting.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that works, because if you, what happens if you change your? Maybe you have to then register that with your, with your boss, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, there'll be some experts listening that will tell you exactly how it works. But I think at the BBC, it's too big and important an institution. We need to feel very confident that we have genuinely got people that are not biased. And, and I just don't think we have. And I'm awfully sorry to say, but I sometimes feel it's just full of Cambridge 6 types that really aren't keen on the UK. Yeah. You'll find somebody else that'll give you a completely different opinion, but my view is free me from the shackles of paying the licence fee, and then, I don't watch the best thing to come out of the BBC in recent years is The Traitors. The news content is abysmal. Thank goodness for yourselves, Talk Radio, and other news channels that we can watch on YouTube, and we can make our own minds up, and we can read the newspapers. We're all fairly intelligent. But this attitude of the BBC, and it does come across, we know better.
Yeah,
you're making a mistake. Listen to us. And that's just how I see it. I really hope they lose the licence issue, and we can just make the choices ourselves.
There it is. Great call, Nick. Thank you very much. Nick's a new caller in Horsham. Thank you to him. I've just realised, by the way, the guy that texted and said about the Trump documentary going out before the election, I think he was talking about the documentary, I thought he was talking about Trump's words. Yes, the documentary did go out just before, in October, before the November election of Trump's second term. So forgive me, I thought you were talking about the speech that he gave. I'm not sure whether that is, he said it could have cost Trump the election. Well, it's made for the domestic market. I know we're all global these days. I don't have a problem with that so much. I think if you were going to vote for Trump, I don't think a Panorama documentary was going to change that. And you could have easily found evidence of Trump speaking and say, I think that was irresponsible. And other people heard it and said, I don't think that was irresponsible. Panorama could have made that version of events, and they could have strung together, some montages either side and gone, right, well, some people see it that he was inciting some kind of insurrection, and others say, no, he was talking about protesting peacefully. He was talking cobblers anyway, because he was banging on about a rigged election, of course, which never happened. There are still people among us who believe it did. Either way, it's Donald Trump. We know what to expect from the man. They've still not explained how they managed to criminally edit his words into one sentence that never actually happened. More from you on the way. 0344 499 1.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
And good afternoon. Yeah, welcome back. It is the home of common sense. What are we talking about here? Well, two high-profile resignations. Were they pushed or did they just leave of their own accord? Tim Davie, he is the director, or was the director general of the BBC, and Deborah Turnis, she was news chief over there at the Beeb. This, of course, really came to a head after the Trump January 6th speech panorama documentary re-edit. Extraordinary stuff. This morning, Chairman Samir Shan did acknowledge that there were 500 complaints and he's now apologised for what happened. Where does the BBC go next? How do you regain trust in the BBC? I think it's a reasonable question, right? Also this afternoon, the Home Office is here. They're brilliant. The Home Office is like an episode of Roadrunner, isn't it? Always trying to find imaginative ways to catch the beast. The Home Office has earmarked 14 new sites to house up to 10,000 migrants. They've got another idea. Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, is attempting to mirror Denmark's tougher model, but ministers have suggested another way. What about offering £100 a week to get people out of hotels on top of the 50 quid a week they already receive? Not sure what you do with that 100 quid a week. It's not going to get you a place to rent very easily. But of course, with all of this, the taxpayers pick up the bill. They just can't seem to solve the fundamental problem. We'll talk about that next. And councils are pleading poverty, but still splashing out on vanity projects. The best example of this is Blackpool, who spent £35,500 of taxpayers' money on a Pride zebra crossing. They wanted to put the rainbow on the black and white to give it a bit of extra, look at us, aren't we relevant? By the way, they're 570 million quid in debt. And they're not the only culprits in this. I mean, one council is telling constituents they might have to wait 103 years for potholes to be... I'm not kidding you, 103 years for potholes to be repaired. We won't be using roads, and we'll be floating around on little kind of jet-propelled bubbles of some kind. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. Loads of comments coming in, particularly on the BBC. Thank you to Daz, who says the apology from the BBC sums up what is wrong within. It is a blatant disregard for any of its actions. The error of judgment term is a joke. It was an attempted assassination of the president's character, meaning Trump, by means of fabricated news reporting. I've now cancelled. The last chance for me was Glastonbury, that idiot chanting anti-Semitism. Trump is a smart guy and a good leader. If I were him, I'd increase all UK tariffs by 5% and sue the BBC. This would absolutely wipe them out. It's a good point, actually. I mean, they could go there, couldn't he? But there is now a letter apparently gone from President Trump to the BBC, and the BBC have acknowledged that they have received this letter with the potential possibility of some kind of lawsuit. 0344 499 1000. Let's go back to that 100 quid a week story for asylum seekers. This, of course, is tax-funded hotels story again. These are new plans formed by ministers. It comes as the Home Office earmarks at least 14 sites which will be used to house up to 10,000 migrants as part of a major shake-up. Apparently going to force them to adhere to tougher conditions, something of that nature. Either way, you sort of already get the sense of the desperate attempt to sort something out from the complete wrong end of the telescope on this. Robert Bates is from the Centre of Migration Control. Robert, good afternoon to you. I described this a second ago. It's like a constant episode of Roadrunner, where they're constantly searching out new ways to get their catch and failing every single time. This is the latest. They've got new areas to be considered for accommodation, and there's this idea of giving them 100 quid a week to leave a hotel. What's going on?
Well, I think basically they realised hotels, they're not able to find many more that are eligible. HMOs, there really isn't the market for the increasing number of individuals that are coming into the asylum system. So they're at a bit of a loose end. They don't really know what to do. I think what they're basically hoping is that those asylum seekers that are coming into the system, knowing a few family members or knowing a few individuals, will end up housing themselves with them and giving them £100 for the privilege. It's an absolutely ridiculous proposal, because what it effectively boils down to is we're hoping to tackle the ever-growing asylum backlog. We're hoping to stop the boats by paying those that come here illegally even more money. We'll be spending up to £500 per month per person under the scheme. Hundreds of millions of pounds a year. And actually, by taking them out of hotels where they are somewhat centralised, we can somewhat keep an eye on them, and allowing them to stay with their extended networks actually really is likely to lead to a proliferation of the kind of crime that we are now getting increasingly familiar with. Those individuals coming across on boats and saying, oh, I know Tom, Dick or Harry who lives in Rotherham, for instance, he can house me. The likelihood is that actually this is a real opportunity for those criminal networks that we know are operating across the country to get more clustered and to bring in greater manpower. So that's an absolutely ludicrous proposal. And on the point of accommodation and whether actually they're going to be housed in sort of RAF bases or wherever it might be, it doesn't matter a squat if they're not going to be housed in centres that have barbed wire fences and are detaining them in one place. Because the real problem here is the British public are increasingly concerned about the crime that is being brought into their communities as a result of this, people being allowed to walk around, wander around. And if we're not going to detain them behind fences and stop them from roaming free and causing havoc in communities, then really what is the point?
Yeah. And again, I mentioned the wrong end of the telescope here on this story, Robert. It's stopping the boats that is clearly central to the issue. Well, Rishi Sunak talked about stopping the boats. Keir Starmer talks about smashing the gangs. Neither of those men succeeded in their desired outcome of any of this. But fundamentally, it's, we shouldn't be sitting here now, should be having a debate about where or how we fund or house tens of thousands of people that were simply not meant to be in the country.
Exactly. And if we'd taken the decision when this crisis first started to, rather than wasting billions on hotels and expensive accommodation, to actually boost our immigration detention facilities. At the moment, they've only got about 2,000 beds, which is clearly not enough for the scale of the crisis in the Channel, and started investing in boosting the capacity of these places, we'd be in a much better position because these individuals wouldn't be absconding. Tens of thousands have disappeared, just simply disappeared, escaped the Home Office since 2019. Goodness knows where they are. And, actually, if we'd sort of been very sensible at how are we going to process these small boat arrivals, we're going to put them in a detention facility and make sure that they're removed from the country within 2 weeks. If that had been our starting point, we'd be in a far better position. The cost would be coming down. This situation would have resolved itself because individuals would have seen that Britain isn't a soft touch and there's no point trying to break into our country. Instead, we had a Conservative government that just threw money at the problem with no real plan. And unfortunately, what we are experiencing is the result of that Conservative government. And Labour are making it damn sight worse, don't get me wrong, but it really is on the Conservative shoulders, this one.
Yeah, 100%. Robert, thank you for your time. Robert Bates from the Centre for Migration Control. I think we'll look back at this in years to come. And school kids might even be learning about it. I mean, don't hold your breath under the current system, but about how a nation was unable to secure its own borders, identify people who came to this country, and then you have people like Starmer come along and go, we need... does he honestly think we're all stupid? Digital ID, whatever you think about, even if you're a supporter of digital ID and you think it's a rather good, funky, cool idea, it's not going to stop people coming. How would it stop that, for heaven's sake? These people are anonymous anyway. I have no idea who they are. It's not going to somehow eradicate the black market. It's not going to put a stop to people working illegally. It simply won't do that. Because people who are working illegally are working for people who don't care about legality of digital ID. They're not checking the papers today. So they're not going to be checking your digital ID. They don't give a hoot. Makes no difference at all. Paul in Fife says, something I've never understood. Why does the UK in 2025 need a state broadcaster? When I hear that term, I'm instantly reminded of East Germany, Russia or North Korea. It's a good point. That's probably slightly my fault. I was picked up on it by a guest. State-funded broadcaster is meant to be the point. But you're right, Paul. Fundamentally, you're right. It's really hard to find a defence of the BBC. I don't watch I don't really do social media, and I don't watch a lot of TV either. But I was thinking the other day on the back of this Traitors story, I've not watched that either, but I'm loosely familiar with what's gone on. I understand my other half watched it. She thought it was fantastic. The Strictly Come Dancing thing, not my cup of tea, but I get it. It's, it's light entertainment. It's probably a great show if you enjoy that kind of thing. the David Attenborough stuff, obviously that speaks. If the BBC could find like 30 or 40 equivalencies, not necessarily all the same genre, but bangers, real absolute hits that would roll off every time, would that change the way you looked at the BBC? Because the argument still stands, well, it might do, but why would I not get the choice of whether I pay for it? If it had 40, 50 shows that were all equally as compelling, you could easily make the argument that go, OK, it's a bit weird that we have to pay for it, but pound for pound, it provides better value for money than, say, Netflix or Apple or all the many other streaming services, because we've got proportionately more hits on that. But it's not doing that either. It's got some moments that people go, oh, I really like that, I really enjoy that, but it hasn't got a kind of continuous sense of the go-to operation, the family sitting around the TV and glued to the BBC. There'll be some programmes they watch, possibly not even at the time they're broadcast. You watch them in your own time. You probably watch Traitors on the train on the way to work, or when you got home, or laying in bed, whatever. So it's really hard. I can't any longer find an argument to say, yeah, this is why we need to keep a licence. There literally isn't one. Doesn't exist. Let's go to Lenny down in Ashford. How you doing, Lenny?
I'm tickety-boo, thank you, Ian.
Glad to hear it. On that issue of asylum hotels, what's going on?
Well, what I can make out of the day, that the news that is going around, that there are whistleblowers saying that they're not checking the people out properly. They're allowing people in who should not be allowed in.
Yeah.
And with Starmer's voice and his attitude, there is nothing positive that he wants to stop the boats. And I truly believe it's just going to be history repeating itself, because he said we got a lot to clear. It's going to be the same as 2011, when Damien Green gave a silent amnesty to 160,000. Because we're in the same position. And I think that's what's going to happen. They're more or less, Starmer's just going to give a silent amnesty to everybody that wants to come in.
Is that because they've already talked about this, haven't they? Is that likely to be the only way that you can imagine a government? I mean, it's not a good way because it doesn't work, but because you end up still with, like you say, 160,000 people in your country that weren't meant to be there. But ultimately, is it going to, like a reset button? Is that the only way that Starmer can actually do it now? To go, right, OK, we're going to get serious from now. Everybody else, you stay.
Well, until we get serious and do something positive in stopping the boats, nothing it does means anything.
Yeah.
Because you've got to shut the door to stop people coming in, to stop the numbers going up.
Well, 100%. And it's no use having an amnesty every 5 years, because that's kind of, or every 10 or 15 years for that matter, because that's almost just like saying we've got an open door policy.
Yeah, well, he's doing nothing positive. You name one thing positive, all he keeps talking is a load of waffle. And, and with his history, where, I mean, when he was a barrister, he fought to let everybody stay in our country that he could. It's against his mentality to slow them down or to stop them. It doesn't go together.
No. Well, you're meant to, of course, a bit like a BBC journalist, you're meant to leave your politics at the door when you become a BBC journalist, and when you're a Prime Minister, obviously you come in with a certain central philosophy because you do represent a view, but your entrenched position, certainly as a human rights lawyer, should not be used as a way to, colour the way you make policy for that government. And that's, I think we can all see that's exactly what Keir's ultimately. This is why you don't hear the Yvette Coopers or the Mahmoods or the Starmers getting animated about this, Lenny, because it's not in their DNA,
Well, it's not, what you're saying, and, and all his life, and I mean, And we all know, if you look at the way Starmer the actions that he's taking, they're all for the benefit of Starmer.
Yeah.
They're not for the benefit of the country. You know, he's got the biggest ego, just like Blair, and he's acting the same as Blair.
Yep.
And all that matters to Starmer is what he personally wants and not what's good for the country.
Yeah, I hear it. Lenny, great call as ever. Thank you, Lenny in Ashford. Philip's in Somerset. Back to the BBC. Philip, what are you making of all of this? It's a flipping mess, mate.
Yes, it is, Ian. Great show.
Thank you.
And thank you for having me on.
It's a pleasure.
I was just thinking, when you had your last guest on from, I think it was a former BBC guy.
Yeah.
I was thinking about the Ofcom angle from this, and I was thinking, if it was either your channel or another channel very similar to yours doing this, they'd have had you off air yesterday.
I reckon it would have been probably something like a £500,000 fine for that.
Yes.
I'm not even
absolutely.
exaggerating
But
that.
the
I
BBC
genuinely
seemed to
think
get
it would be in that ballpark of certainly the hundreds of thousands.
Yes, but the BBC seem to get away with it, and they verify their own. They verify their own stuff, which is a bit unbelievable. But the other thing was that the gentleman that was on there saying they don't listen to talk. I run my own show for business. A lot of people do listen to talk, and they also listen to another channel, and they also don't listen to the BBC because of their biased way they produce their news. And your team there have to produce it correctly. Again, going back to Ofcom, because if it wasn't correct, they would have you off again yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can, I can sit here having an opinion, but the newsreader doesn't have an opinion, and the newsreader doesn't play out packages that are skew-if, that, clearly came from an iffy angle.
No, that's why I like listening to talk, because you get the right opinion, and you make up your own opinion then, and you get both sides of the story.
Of course you do.
But as I say, if you wasn't doing it right, and you were telling not the truth, then Ofcom would have you off air yesterday. So I just think that guy wasn't quite correct in what he was saying.
Yeah. 100%. Listen, great call. Thank you very much indeed for that, Philip. Lovely to speak. Biggest fines that Ofcom have given out. They're also in charge of the Royal Mail, you've got to remember, which is kind of a bit bizarre. I've never quite... It was about communication, I suppose. The Royal Mail did get fined £50 million for a serious breach of competition law. This was back in 2014. They also fined BT Openreach for failing to pay full compensation to providers for late installation of Ethernet lines. They fined BT £42 million. No wonder their pockets are deep over there at Ofcom. But in broadcasting terms, ITV were fined for misuse of premium rate services in several programmes. Remember that? The selection of competition finalists, fair conduct in competitions. And it was all over the place. Involved a lot of morning TV, as I remember. And they were fined £5.675 million for that over there at ITV. And so you wonder why the head of Ofcom is worth a few quid. They pay well because they're finding people quite well. But if a commercial operator had doctored a video of a president, and in fact, as a previous caller did point out, although I confused what they were referring to at first, a president just before an election, by the way, they doctored a video of his words. I think that programme's it has been taken off iPlayer. I'm sure it's available it must be somewhere to watch. I'd like to watch the whole panorama, which I think most people, in fairness, probably haven't, just to see a bit more of the context. But isn't it strange? This story is now, over a week ago, the Telegraph dropped the Trump story, the Trump editing panorama story. And I've yet to hear, and I was talking to somebody about this last night, when I first saw it in the Telegraph, I thought, right, this is how it works, all right? You see a headline, you go, oh, my God. And then you start reading the story, and you get a bit further down the story, and by about the fourth or fifth paragraph, you have the kind of explanation. And it normally slightly dilutes the headline. And you go, right, OK, they didn't quite do that. And as I read the story, there was no explanation from the BBC. There was not anything that said, no, what we were trying to do was this. And we might have failed, but we were trying to do this. Nothing. So maybe tomorrow we'll have the explanation. Because I'm desperate to know, partly, not just as a punter and as a licence payer, But because I do this for a living, I've been in more edit suites, I've sat with producers and editors and programme controllers and directors, all sorts of situations. I remember interviewing a former terrorist, and, you know, the interview had to be done with a programme executive in the room, then it was given to a lawyer, and then it went through all of this stuff. This is in the commercial world. So I was desperate to see, I wanted to know the thinking of how that interview was made and how it ended up on our TV and who were the people involved in the process. And I can almost guarantee, without even knowing factually, that at least half a dozen people would have been involved in the whole process. But the specific editing, the physical sitting there on an Adobe or whatever edit they were using for it was an independent production company, so they might have had that nobody, like, so you give an editor, my other half is an editor, all right, so, you know, I know this. So you give an editor a load of film and you say, right, this is what I want you to create. So somebody tells the editor, right, there it is, it's all on a screen, you know, it's got the little graphs of sound and vision, and I want you to take that bit, and that bit. So you'd think certainly the editor, the person that put it together, who could have been completely freelance and said, well, it's nothing to do with me specifically. I was just asked to put this together. I didn't even know what it was for. So it wouldn't have been that, but you take the point. But somebody would have directed them to do that, a producer stroke director, and other people would have been involved. And then they would have looked at it and then it would have gone to the execs. And anyway, I'm desperate to know how that actually happened. There's been no explanation. I really want to know what that process was and who said what to who, because at least one person would have gone, is this a bit mischievous what we're doing here? And then maybe somebody go, no, I think it's fine, because it's fine. No one's explained this, how it happened. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk. This December.
Our national broadcaster, Nigel, that quite rightly we can say is no longer impartial, and there is institutional bias.
Trump is just really the final straw, isn't it? And by the way, I mean, I did speak to the president on Friday, and I can't even tell you how angry he was. As he said, is this how you treat allies? I mean, it's a very strong point. It's a very strong point, isn't it? I mean, without America, we are basically defenceless. And to be stitched up by our national broadcaster, really, he was very, very angry.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
It is Talk 27 minutes after 2 o'clock. Let's go to Norman in Dartford on the BBC. Norman, what have you got for us? Afternoon.
Well, early on you were talking about the trust of the BBC.
Yeah.
I don't think they'll ever get that back. It takes ages to get trust, and you lose it in five seconds.
Yeah, spot
With
on.
this programme, you're not talking about ordinary television. You're talking about a flagship programme for the BBC.
Correct.
Now, the higher-ups would have been involved in this. That's why what you want to know, you'll have a job to find out.
Yeah.
Because this goes higher up the ladder than some editor or from some other company.
Well, that's the most worrying point, is that somebody, well, not just one person, multiple people thought it was okay. So you have to go, well, hang on, how did you come to that? If you were one of the people that watched it and went, that's fine, what the hell was going on in the mind of that person?
Well, you've had ex-executive, one after the other on television, on talk, all over the weekend.
Yeah.
And none of them think it was really wrong.
It's kind of interesting, isn't it? I saw somebody, thankfully I have heard at least some very anti-Trump voices. I mean, even John Mayer, the guy we had on, very defensive of the BBC, even he, to be fair, said it was terrible.
He said that man says everything you need to know about the BBC.
But he did say that he thought it was terrible what happened, and he also thought the BBC verifiers shouldn't be there. So
he didn't earlier on in the week say that, though.
Maybe he didn't, but I've heard a few voices acknowledge, because I don't know, I was talking to somebody yesterday who's a bit left-wing, and they were saying to me, how did they get away with that? And it's like, well, they haven't got away with it, really, but nobody with a straight face can... you don't even have to know anything about journalism or how to put a TV programme together to know that this was all shades of wrong.
But, I mean, I don't know if they realise how serious this is.
Well, I'd like to think someone does now. But the problem is the kind of sort of, what was it that Andrew Marr called it? A sort of a liberal underpinning of opinion or something that goes on, a liberal bias, I think he said. The people that have the liberal bias don't know they've got the liberal bias. That's the problem. They think they have an objective view on things.
You see, if I watch a programme like Panorama, I think I'm watching facts.
Well, that's what you should be forced to think, right? That should be how...
No, that's what I've always thought, Ian.
Correct.
I like to watch programs, but I want to hear facts.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear people's opinions.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be forced to pay to listen to people's opinions.
Nope. That's the way it's meant to work.
I can watch Talk and other programmes for free, and I'll get their opinions. And if I don't like them, I'll turn them off.
Yeah.
BBC, I'm still paying for them.
It's all very simple stuff, isn't it?
They cannot get into their head. The minute you pay for something, it changes the relationship between you and that programme or that person.
Completely.
You know what I mean, Ian?
And of course, that's not how it's meant to be, is it? I mean, with something like the BBC, you are meant to... inbuilt within it is that you're not going to get, even if you don't like their style, you might think it's a bit too staid or it's a bit too kind of, I don't know, it's not the way you like to digest news. That's fine, but you should be able to trust it. You should be able to go, actually, this is, don't agree with them, but I trust them.
Well, I've always believed programs like that were fact,
Yeah.
not opinions. There's a lot of bloody difference between fact and opinion.
Correct.
And that's what I'm against.
Yeah.
You sit here and you really believe that. I mean, you watch that speech, you wouldn't know it was doctored, a normal person.
In a million years, you wouldn't know it was doctored. There's no way. They edited it not as a. I keep hearing somebody. I saw somebody on social media yesterday going, it was a montage. No, it wasn't. It was edited to sound like one complete sentence. I know that, if you watch it carefully, you can go, OK, it's from different angles. But that's not for the viewer to work that out. That should be explicit in putting a programme like that together. The voiceover should go, right, here's some highlights of what Mr Trump said over the course of that speech. And then you can produce it and edit it in a way that it's quite obvious you're taking selected bits from different parts of the speech. It's very easy. It's not, that's route one in editing school. You don't need to be skilled to work that out. It's just what you do.
I mean, that to me, the biggest thing is I keep saying it was a mistake. It wasn't a mistake.
Yeah.
It was deliberate.
It was deliberate indeed. Norman, great call as ever. Thank you very much indeed for that. 0344 499 1000. We've got lots to get through here, including your comments. On the migrant hotel story, this is interesting. The migrant hotel story that we were discussing at the beginning of the hour. Kevin says, every time we hear of illegal immigrants, the state wants to give them cash of some sort. It's crazy. Last time I see no illegal migrant was cold or starving, so why keep throwing money? There's total madness, says Kevin in Southampton, because they don't know what else to do. It's the only way I can think of this one. Reference Blackpool Council and others wasting taxpayers' money. Don in Chelmsford says the solution to expensive council vanity projects is to surcharge councillors that make the decision. The problem would stop instantly. Again, it comes down to one of those, much like we're talking about the BBC, there is genuinely a correlation here, because when somebody in Blackpool, despite being 570 million quid in debt, somebody at a council meeting must have gone, let's paint some zebra crossings with the Pride rainbow flag. It's going to cost 35,500 quid. Somebody somewhere went, yeah, OK. Someone actually said, yeah, OK. Maybe they said, that's a good idea. Perhaps they added, what could go wrong? Well, you're 570 million quid in debt for a start. So whoever said, yeah, OK, should be made to repay the 35,000. I mean, that's really how this stuff should work. 0344 499 1000. More from you coming next on Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Never miss Kev's Political Asylum. You want to hear incredulity, you want to hear some good quality journalism, you want to hear great debate. Kev's here every night, Monday to Friday, 7 o'clock on the Political Asylum. Rachel Reeves is expected to raise the headline rate of income tax for the first time in 50 years. We're now aware of this. She is about to give an interview. Curiously, in fact, she's giving it right now to the BBC. So we'll bring you any salient headlines from that. Funny, isn't it? Why are you talking to the BBC? It's always rather extraordinary when that happens. It's a move which risks breaking Labour's manifesto promise not to, of course, do anything with those basic income tax, VAT, national insurance. She also plans to raise dividend tax, which could put people off investing and hit pensioners who rely on extra incomes from shares. Martin Beck, Chief Economist at WPI Strategy, joins us now on this one. Martin, good afternoon to you. Look, I know it's not easy, and I don't envy being a Chancellor, and we can all be armchair Chancellors, but there are certain, you'd like to think there are certain fundamentals in this and things that I always thought everybody knew, that if you tax too much, then you scare people off investing or entrepreneurs or starting business. It's that little bit there at the end that I just mentioned that seems to be, well, there's a perception at the very least, let's be fair, we haven't heard the budget yet, it seems to be eluding this government at the moment.
I think the Chancellor finds herself in a difficult position. I mean, as you mentioned, the Labour Party promised in the election not to raise income tax or national insurance contributions or VAT, but the reality for the Chancellor is that the public finances have deteriorated a lot in the last year. And you remember the speech Rachel Reeves gave last week. She gave a whole litany of reasons as to why.
Yeah.
Look, she's now on course to not meet her fiscal rules, and the scale of the deterioration means she's got to find a lot of money to meet those rules and build up some kind of buffer of resilience. And if you think about filling a big fiscal hole, the obvious targets are the three big taxes, which are VAT, national insurance, or income tax, and which income tax is the largest, raises the most money.
Should they, I mean, would it help or would it just spook the markets in some respect if a Chancellor just went, look, we're absolutely knackered here, and, you know, short-termism plays no part in economic strategy. We've got to look ahead. So top rate of tax is going to be 60p. It's as simple as that. Top rate, that is. So over, I don't know, 200 grand a year or something, you're going to pay 60p. I mean, it might not be everybody's cup of tea. It would be painful for many. Would that not be the more honest way of doing this? Or are there reasons why those that are fiscally in charge can't go there?
I think that the problem with doing it on the top rate is that you might not raise much money because the people who earn the most generally are the most mobile. They'll probably find it easiest to leave the country. If you raise the basic rate or the higher rate of income tax, you're levying a higher tax on tens of millions of people, most of whom can't. They've got to carry on working. They can't just leave their jobs. They can't emigrate to Dubai. So in a way, it's a more reliable way of raising money. You know pretty much exactly how much you're going to generate from increasing those income tax rates.
So it's more of a, yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, £200,000, I know that's a lot of money. It's many times multiplied of the average wage, but there's lots of people that do earn that money. I mean, the average solicitor might earn it, a doctor might earn it, who wouldn't be legging it for the hills or Dubai or anywhere. But what you're saying there, Martin, is that actually if you put it somewhere sort of in the middle, then you've got more of a certainty. You can at least know that that money is almost guaranteed to come in.
That's right, and you're also spreading the burden amongst a much bigger number of people.
Yeah.
You know, there's 30 million people in work in the UK. If you increase the tax on all of them, it's probably not going to hit any one individual too hard. Whereas if you try and focus the tax rises on a subset of that group, then you run the risk of sort of unintended consequences.
Yeah, I mean, people are always pointing to Scandinavia, aren't they? And I always find that rather interesting. I'm pretty sure if you go to Denmark or Sweden or something and, you know, say did a survey on the street, is everything tickety-boo? They'd probably go, no, it's bloody awful around here. We've got terrible things going on. The economy's in the slumps. And, you know, this idea that everyone's sort of living in a hammock and everything's free and there's a hospital at the end of every single road. I mean, this is nonsense. But they do charge people more taxation. That is true.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, income tax is actually relatively low in the UK, taxes on workers. I mean, our tax burden's around the average for developed economies, but the average worker in the UK pays a relatively small share of their income in tax. And that I guess that creates an additional argument for the government to say, well, we've got to raise money from somewhere, so let's focus it on wage earners and workers.
Yeah. Is there a kind of magic tax out there, Martin, somewhere that people like yourself and economists that think about this stuff and play with numbers and spreadsheets and abacuses or abaci all day long? I'm sure you haven't really got one of those, but you take my point. Is there a kind of like, why don't chancellors just do this? Is there one of those moments in your world?
What we really want to do, we want to reduce taxes on effort and work. We want to encourage people to work as hard as possible. So there is an economic argument which says that we should shift the tax burden from effort and work to consumption.
Yeah.
So we should cut income tax and put up VAT. The trouble with that is that putting VAT up puts prices up. It makes the Bank of England's life a bit harder in terms of cutting interest rates. And there's a distributional argument, and if you put it more of the tax burden onto VAT and less on income tax, you're hitting the poor harder than the rich. So I guess you've got to focus on other things other than just economics, also fairness and equity and so on.
Yeah, fair point. Martin, great to have you on. Thank you. We'll watch with interest in the next couple of weeks when we hear that budget. Rachel Reeves, currently live, giving an interview to an organisation called the BBC. Remember them? They used to be, that lot. Still around, apparently. She's doing an interview with them. We'll bring you any headlines that come from that. That was Martin Beck, you just heard there, Chief Economist at WPI Strategy. I know it's not easy, and obviously if you're skint, my fear of this country is that we are going to be more and more skint, not like this budget isn't going to somehow solve some monumental economic block that has got in the way of everything, and suddenly Rachel Reeves is going to do this. She's going to say it's not going to be popular, but I'm going to implement these tax rises. But look, a year down the line, everything will be amazing. I sense that a year down the line we'll be in the same position. It feels like that, right? Everything feels like that. There's no great sense of entrepreneurial input and exciting things on the horizon. And you can throw cost of living and price of fuel and energy and all that stuff into it as well. Back to your call. Steve's in Scunthorpe on the BBC. Steve, afternoon.
Afternoon to you.
What are you thinking?
Well, Question Time. I used to watch it religiously a few years ago. I was watching it because you realise how biased it is. I think BBC needs to get some trust back. What they need to do is to get a new production company for Question Time, but they need to advertise in local areas to be in the audience.
Well, they do. The way the audience is selected on Question Time, they have a very strict, and you meant to lose your job over this if you get it wrong, policy of getting representation in the audience from X amount of political parties. They don't always achieve it spot on, and of course, not every party. I mean, if you have a party that's got 200 MPs and a party that's got 5 MPs, do you give the same audience, you wouldn't divide it between, say, 50% each. You'd go, well, it's obviously 95% to one and 5 to the other, whatever. But then they have this big gap where they say, OK, we have representatives of the audience from Labour, Tories, Liberal, Green, Reform. And then for the other 25% of the tickets for the audience, it could be anybody that turns up. That's meant to be how it works.
Yeah, but I can remember when they held it in Scunthorpe that I couldn't remember seeing anything locally advertising it, apply to get a seat or whatever. It just seems a bit of a stitch up, to be honest.
Do you think to me, the format of Question Time just feels so dated. I mean, it was one of those appointment to listen things for me or watch. I'm sure you had the same, Steve. I was excited to watch Question Time, and I'd record it if I wasn't in, and I'd come back. I loved it. I don't know when the change was for me. I think to me it was just the format. Of course, the BBC also get attacked for having Nigel Farage on there too many times.
Yeah, but the thing is, I did say to the researcher that, they had Nigel Farage on there with a audience that just slated him all the time, trying to make Nigel Farage look bad. So obviously they're going to have him.
But if you are Tory and Labour, then you're always going to have more people in the audience that don't like Nigel Farage, right? Tory, Labour and Liberal.
Yeah, but, it's... and I think, what they should do, really, they should go after what you're saying. It's the production companies that made all these force things, the Bob Villeneuve thing.
I just wonder whether they're not checked enough, I mean, maybe commissioners who, put out to October Films and Endemol and all these kind of companies that make stuff independently. Most of the people that run those companies used to work at, ITV, BBC, those kind of places. So they all know each other. And do they just trust the integrity of these companies without really checking their homework?
And that they should be held responsible if they put it out.
Yeah. 100% they should.
It's like if you're a landlord and one of your bar staff do something wrong, you as the landlord are responsible.
Of course you are. Yeah, it doesn't.
And lots of they can't sort of hold it. Oh well, that wasn't us. It was no. Yeah. And they should then come out and then block those people even working again. I mean, what annoys me is little things like still got Joe Brand appearing on BBC. On shows and that, and that was a person who said, "If as you would know, it should have been acid if it was her with Nigel Farage." So what is she still doing on BBC? They got rid of Carol Thatcher. Something backstage.
That's on the one show. This was about a tennis player and his hair, wasn't it, if you remember? Yeah. Listen, Steve, I mean, there's always good, we can pluck those examples all over the place. The one thing we all agree on, though, is that there's a fundamental rot in the BBC. Thank you, Steve, for that. Steve in Scunthorpe. And I just, the older you get, and is this just me? Once you go over 50, do you suddenly develop I don't know whether it's a grumpy old man thing or what it is, but you kind of develop a sense of all these people that are meant to be brilliant and amazing, whether they work in broadcasting or whether they work in industry. And I keep coming back to Paula Venables. I say that because she seems to be the go-to person. But she was a sort of famous case. She ran the post office when everything was going pear-shaped, didn't know what the hell was going on, and some terrible things happened. You sort of look at that and I just get this sense that, if you look at her career, she sort of spent her time in the last 20, 30 years in rather impressive high-end jobs being paid very good six-figure salaries. And I think she was sort of perfect. She was a middle-aged woman. She was a bit Miss Marpley. She was a vicar, I think. She's a qualified vicar or priest or something. And just kept getting, you need Paula Venables on the case. She's brilliant. Nobody ever stopped to go, is she? Is it really? What are you basing that on? Well, she's had this job and that job, and she worked over there, and she was the chairman of this, and she... Yeah, but is she good? Well, we kind of assume she is. Yeah, it's not really good enough, is it? You're running the post office, mate. You've got to be demonstrably good. There's got to be good, hard evidence to show your brilliance. And the world is full of this. I see it in every industry. People that you look at and they call it the Peter principle, where people sort of rise to these positions. And we've all worked with somebody, haven't we, who was promoted, and you think, how the hell did Joe from accounts become the chief financial officer? How did that happen? Joe was like rubbish when we used to work with Joe. Now running the flipping wage department. How did that happen? Everybody's experienced that. But I think the BBC really do have a PhD in this. I think the former head of news, from all I'm hearing, I don't know the woman, and I haven't, so I've no inner knowledge of this, other than people I've spoken to that worked there that felt she was massively out of her depth on this one. But then who is in their depth, in fairness, to be head of news at the BBC? Imagine having that job tomorrow. You're going to be head of news at the BBC. What have I done to deserve that? Please don't give me that job. I'm just the janitor. 0344 499 1000. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Lines are open. This is Talk. Big news coming this December. Our talkTV app is moving to the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. From Monday, 1st of December, the talkTV app will no longer exist, so don't miss out. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
It is Talk. Yes, welcome back. We've got a brand new Voice of Doom. These keep going very quickly. I am absolutely confident that this Voice of Doom is going to go on for 3 years. OK, that's my prediction. Dave, who's on the desk today, put this together. He's had varying successes over the years. Well, not many, actually, on this, but he's had a couple. Let's have a listen to the new Voice of Doom. Rightly and properly. I mean, that's an absolute stinker, isn't it? No one is ever going to get that. If somebody gets that today, I tell you, there's something going on. It's one of Dave's relatives. That's all I would say. This is the mystery voice with a political edge to it. So you're looking for a politician, past or present, dead or alive, young, old, you know the score. Have another listen. Rightly and properly. The number to get in touch is 87222. 87222 if you want to have a crack at that. And if we get a right answer, and we're never going to get a right answer to that, surely, we'll reveal all after the headlines at 3. Another listen. Rightly and properly. I mean, that's absolutely up there with the hardest ever. 87222. Back to your calls on the BBC. Paul is in Bath. How you doing, Paul?
I'm very good, thanks. Ian, are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. What are your thoughts?
Well, I've been listening to the show as you're going on, and you're covering a lot of subjects that there are obviously very rightly questions asked. My concern really lies with the production company that put this thing together, because very often the BBC funds stuff out to private organisations. So we've listened, we've watched David. Is it Davis go, the head of the?
Yeah, Tim Davey. Yeah.
And then Turness, another very bad influence on the news. But what about the guys that were involved in it that were lesser down the scale, but directly had an input into this thing? The producer, the director, and the editor.
Yeah.
I'd like to see this fired, because those people are the ones that have the endemic belief that this is all right to do. They must have gone to someone higher than them and said, "Can we do this?"
But But they should also. You might think though, because that's true what you've just said, Paul. But you might think, well, we're never going to get away with this, because when we give the BBC what we've made, they're going to look at it and go, "Sorry, mate, you can't do that."
But do you not think that the actual mindset of thinking they could do that? That's what's wrong. It should be that news reporting is factual. You had a man on earlier on who was saying, when he watches Panorama, he needs to believe in it.
Yeah.
That's what and that's what the British public need to be able to do when they watch any news programme. Either it's the national broadcaster or it's an independent commercial. You want to believe in the news. You've got to believe in it. Otherwise, what's the point of having them? We may as well just tune into Facebook or one of the other.
That's right. What did you watch on TV last night? Oh, Facebook. The cat videos were brilliant.
Yeah, it was astonishing. The grassy knoll, the shot didn't come from at all across the grassy knoll.
No.
What it actually came was a missed cork from a champagne bottle out of the hotel.
Yeah, that's what it was. And we've solved it. There we go, Paul. We've actually solved the JFK assassination in one conversation. What about that? Love it. Paul, great call. Thank you, mate, for that. This comes from Steve in East Yorkshire. He says, I'm fed up of hearing apologists for the BBC excuse what they did as a mistake or error of judgment. Someone deliberately doctored the video, likely with collusion from others, to distort the truth and present a desired and detrimental narrative. That's not a mistake or an error of judgment, says Steve. The funny thing is, and I said this at the beginning, look, when that happened, when Trump gave that speech, it was quite clear to me he wanted, he was talking about rigged elections, and he wanted people to get down to the Capitol building and protest. Now, he did talk about fight, and you're fighting for your, we're fighting for our future and all sorts of other things. He didn't say go down and have a riot, OK? He definitely didn't say that. But I think you'd be forgiven for going, yeah, it's not unreasonable. I mean, but he got impeached for this, for God's sake, I mean, there's like 240 people on the list still. I think it's kind of gone away. He's become the president. There were judges that even Trump appointed that said, no, I'm sorry, this cannot, you can't have a president saying this kind of stuff. Many people testified that actually they only went there because the president told them to. So you could create, and I appreciate, look, I'm not saying this. I know people have two different views on this. Some people said, no, he was just talking about, because he also says calm as well. So he was just talking about people making their voices known. You could argue it that way. You could say this is clearly a president that wanted people to get angry. They didn't need to do any doctoring if that's the point they wanted to create. They could have done that with the speech itself. That's what makes it even more mysterious. But this was unequivocally, no shadow of a doubt, a doctored speech. Let's have a listen to the voice of doom. Here it is.
Rightly and properly.
87222 if you know who that is. News is next.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back, everybody. It is the home of common sense. Loads to get through in this final hour of this programme. But Peter Cardwell's going to be here with Drive at 4 o'clock. We are, of course, talking about the fallout at the BBC. It's absolutely chaos there. It's like a flipping war zone. When you see the BBC reporting on itself almost 24/7 in the last couple of days. Tim Davey, who was the Director General, he's resigned. Chief of News, Deborah Turnis, she's had to quit as well. They didn't really have any choice. Predominantly over the Panorama Dr. Trump speech. But there's a bit more to it than that, isn't there? The chair, Samir Shah, has come out and said, has apologised for what happened. What next for the BBC? How do they regain your trust? More thoughts on that. We're also talking about the Home Office, earmarking 14 new sites to house 10,000 migrants. This is the Home Secretary and others, yet again, scratching their head, playing that game of Roadrunner, trying to find the next way to catch their great initiative that will put a stop to the problem. One suggestion is give migrants an extra £100 a week on top of the 50 quid a week, and that will get them out of hotels. Yeah, but where do they then go? I think the wider question is, well, why do we have tens of thousands of people here in the first place? And as we've been discussing, councils pleading poverty while splashing out cash on vanity projects. The award for this, the Oscar for this one, certainly for this week, I'm sure it goes beyond, goes to Blackpool Council, who spent £35,500 repainting zebra crossings to include the rainbow pride flag. This is a council that's £570 million in debt. Poor people, older people, taxpayers are funding this cack, and they're doing it with a straight face. Somebody should get fined for that and be made to repay the £35,500 it cost to paint the flag. What does it cost £35,500 to paint a rainbow, by the way? My little boy is 7. He did one the other day at school, looked rather good. Blow it up, stick it on a zebra crossing if you need it. We'll also talk about the council that has told residents they could wait 103 years for potholes to be repaired. Seriously. 0344 499 1000. Lots on the BBC story. This isn't really going away, and understandably so. They've been pretty much skewered by recent events, and we know about the DG. The Director General had to walk the plank, along with Deborah Turnis, Head of News as well. It's worth having a listen to her. She was forced to quit yesterday, but she was speaking this morning. Here's what she said about BBC News.
I would like to say it has been the privilege of my career to serve as the CEO of BBC News and to work with our brilliant team of journalists. I stepped down over the weekend because the buck stops with me. But I'd like to make one thing very clear. BBC News is not institutionally biased. That's why it's the world's most trusted news provider.
Or is it? Let's speak firstly with Sonia Soda, columnist and broadcaster, written a great piece in The Times called "What's the Point of the BBC if it can't be impartial?", which goes right to the heart of the problem. Sonia, good afternoon to you. She said there the BBC is not institutionally biased. I mean, she was forthright on that point. Do you agree with her?
I think the BBC does have issues with institutional and cultural biases on a couple of issues in particular that were identified in the Prescott leaked memo to the BBC board. One is on Israel and Gaza. The second is on sex and gender and the conflict between women's rights and trans rights. Now, some people might say those are just a couple of issues. Most of the journalistic output of the BBC is impartial and impeccable, and so we should just forget about it all and move on. The reason why I think that that's so problematic and that the defensiveness from BBC leadership and the BBC board is so problematic is because when you're talking about some of the most contested social issues, it's even more important that the BBC is impartial when it comes to those. And I think to take sex and gender, which is an issue I've written a lot about as a journalist, it is obvious that the BBC has been partial and biased in coverage of women's rights in the last few years. And the problem is that when you've got members of the public looking at that coverage, it undermines trust in all of the BBC's output, not just output on that issue. That's not fair on BBC journalists who are upholding impartiality standards, and it's not fair on the British public and British viewers.
Is it guilty by omission, which is sometimes where I sense the problem might be?
I think it's difficult to say without a proper root and branch review. I would be surprised if it's just omission, because I think Yes, there are stories that it just hasn't covered to the extent that you would expect your national broadcaster to cover. For example, stories about the failures in healthcare around young gender questioning children. Michael Prescott particularly focuses on the numbers of young people who are detransitioning after irreversible hormone treatment. So there are some omissions, but it's more than that. There are actually biased stories out there. So one example that he gives is stories on the BBC website that celebrate male athletes self-identifying into women's competitions, and that is presented as a good thing and has no counterbalancing voices raising the legal issues with that, because you're on dodgy legal grounds if that's happening. You're a sporting body, and the basic issues for fairness and safety in women's sports.
But would that not be a great example, Sonia, of what that really needs? If you went to a BBC website and read that, and you know how to put a story together and the arc that you kind of create, somewhere within there you would have said, however, despite the fact that Michelle has done really well at swimming, not everybody is pleased, because Michelle used to be Michael, and this has brought up the issue of trans women in male sports, etc., or in women's sports. Is it that kind of thing that needs to be bolted on in order to ensure their impartiality?
So when the BBC is reporting the news, impartiality means that it has to be, news coverage. It has to give balanced perspectives, and too often on the issues of sex and gender, the BBC puts forward the pro-gender ideology perspective. That's the belief system that men should be able to self-identify into women's spaces, services and sports. And it takes that as the moral starting point. And it sort of seems to assume that people who oppose that are bigoted or transphobic. To give you an example, a few years ago, one item on Women's Hour, it mentioned a few women's groups that are campaigning in this area for single-sex services. These are established protections in law. The presenter felt the need to add a comment to it, saying, some people would say that these groups are transphobic. Well, I'm sorry, that's probably a defamatory statement in law.
Yeah, 100%.
So there is, and it's on this particular issue, I think, over a number of years, there is evidence that the BBC's starting point has not been where the majority of the British public are, which is live and let live when it comes to trans people. But gender identity does not override sex, and men cannot self-identify at will into rape crisis centres or into the female changing room at work in a hospital, for example.
Is there do you think on the wider issue now of the, I suppose on that issue of journalistic bias, in this case the BBC, we all have a little bit of that projection thing going on, don't we? Often we are angry because there are people who overtly would like to see the BBC getting angry about stuff. That's not their job to get angry on either side of an argument. I think we all sensibly agree with that. But of course there are others that believe the BBC don't cover stories at all that should be on. Why are the BBC not talking about it? Therefore, by definition, they are biased.
Yeah, I mean, look, let's not pretend that perfect impartiality is an easy thing to achieve. Some people would say, actually, there's no such thing as pitch perfect neutrality. Even the decisions that you make about which stories to cover and which order to put them in on a news bulletin, for example, you can't do that in a purely impartial way. What I would say is that there are more impartial and less impartial ways to do things, though. I do think generally the quality of BBC journalism is very high, but the corporation is letting its journalists down when it allows groupthink to take hold on specific contested issues, where actually I think the evidence is that some BBC journalists are completely out of step with the public at large.
Yeah, and there is some great examples of that. We were talking a little earlier, there was a story, you will be familiar with this, I'm sure, Sonia. One of the areas that was mentioned, certainly in the stuff the Telegraph were talking about, was this story they wrote about the insurance world that was apparently discriminating against non-white people, or towns or cities that had a higher ethnic minority population were being charged more for their car insurance. And you look at that story, you think, wow, that's terrible. And you can imagine the journalist going to their editors going, look, I've got this story. And the editor going, wow, that's also terrible. So they printed it and they put it up there. And of course, it took about 5 minutes for somebody quite diligent, or, in other words, a journalist, to look at it and go, actually, that's not quite right. And did you ring this person? Did you check that statistic? But, of course, those that gave it the green light were so embroiled in the idea, in love with the idea of this story, they couldn't really see that there might be some bias in it or some inaccuracies.
Yeah, and I think, we don't know exactly how that story got through the net. I think that's a very good hypothesis that you've just come up with. But it all comes back to this issue, which is impartiality. It requires you to be running an institution where there are people who hold a diversity of perspectives, and that's really important, I think. Diversity isn't just about having, people, men and women, and people of different races and people of different social classes. That's important, but it's also important because hopefully it gets you a diversity of perspectives where there is healthy challenge, and somebody can say, look, I know you really want to find a story that finds evidence of discrimination against ethnic minority people, but in this case, this isn't what the data is showing. They are not robust enough to support this claim, and that you need that internal challenge in the organisation. And I think if you listen to people who used to work at the BBC, part of the cultural issue is that sometimes and on particular issues, there just isn't that challenge anymore. So some people will come along with predisposed perspectives, like on sex and gender. They will think that gender ideology is the one true way to look at the world. Yeah. Everyone else should agree or you're a bigot. And then other journalists might be too scared to challenge internally.
Yeah, spot on. Settled views and groupthink, and, you put it all together. It's a sort of cocktail for journalistic disaster. Sonia, great to have you on. Thank you, and nice to speak. Sonia Soda, columnist and broadcaster. Great piece she's written in the Times called "What's the Point of the BBC if it can't be impartial?" She referred there also to people who used to work at the BBC. Let's speak with Philip Cherm, former BBC journalist. Good afternoon to you, Philip. Nice to have you with us.
Good afternoon.
I mean, when you were at the BBC and you know what a newsroom looks like and your way around compiling a story and all the rest of it, did you sense it was a cesspit of left-wing dodgepots running the place, or was it a bit more subtle than that, or did you spot none of this at all?
It wasn't the case at all. The point is, if you're going to get a large number of people into a newsroom environment who are journalists, who have opinions on the world, who are often well read on various aspects of the world, you're going to get quite a large range of opinions. And that, I would say, is one of the clearest things that came to me when I was working at the BBC. Yes, there were some people who privately would express views on the left and have views which are, might be determined as being woke in inverted commas. And there were also, I would say, as many people that I met there who had, quite more conservative with both a small and a large C. So it was not a view I had, particularly in the national and international newsrooms. I found that to be the case. The one clearest thing that came across was this idea that people are often quite well informed by the nature of what they do. They have access to lots of information. People may err towards one side or another, but I never saw any visible or obvious signs that they were trying to push their own agenda.
So what is happening here? What has gone fundamentally wrong? I mean, we keep hearing this term groupthink. I think Andrew Marr referred to a sort of a liberal thread that underpinned parts of BBC journalism. Is it that?
Well, it's a lovely line coming from what is ostensibly right-thinking people, and right I mean that in the political sense.
Did you say right or white?
Right.
Right, OK. Well, we live in funny times, don't we? Best to clarify this.
And in terms of the media. So, some of these views are coming from Kenny Badenoch, who've come from Nigel Farage, and indeed from members of the board themselves. I'm sure you've spoken earlier on about Sir Robbie Gibb, who was appointed by Boris Johnson into that position and clearly has what might be seen as being that right of centre.
That's very
view.
true. But I mean, I know Robbie very well. He used to run Westminster and Daily Politics and all the rest of it. And I remember having conversations with him about this kind of stuff. And he was absolutely passionate about impartiality. It was sort of key to everything he did.
And I would say that almost anybody that wherever they stand within the organisation and wherever their political position is, they would argue that they are absolutely passionate about impartiality. There is a saying, though, isn't there, that says sometimes the truth isn't neutral. And I think what is happening within a lot of the kind of work that has been done with the BBC is that they're trying to find out what the truth is. And if that isn't neutral, then they will leave themselves open to the possibility of criticism from other sides. And I think that's what has happened historically with a number of examples here. There was such as the Gaza documentary, such as the issues with Gary Lineker, even in the evidence which suggested that the Panorama investigation into anti-Semitism in the Labour Party omitted some essential email evidence. So there are those various attempts. And, as Sonia sort of was saying only a moment ago, she was saying that there are people with these various opinions and they may try to push those various agenda. What you can perhaps think is maybe it's not so much a case of them trying to deny other people the right to speak, but starting from a standpoint which is saying, well, hang on, everybody else, most people tend not to think this, so we'll start with this slightly radical thinking in order to be able to offer the balance that's needed. If that's not checked, then of course, it has to be redressed. If it's not, dealt with in a fair and honest and truthful way, or they're trying to hide information, of course, redress it. Pull people up. But it doesn't necessarily mean to say that the agenda agenda is biased.
I get that, and there's certainly not people, overlords standing there in the newsroom every day saying, right, guys, this is the angle we take on this, and this is the. I understand that it's obviously a deeper and a slightly more complex story, but there are cases that jump out once in a while, whether somebody's left wing, right wing, pro BBC, anti BBC. I don't think there's anyone that can find any sort of defence over that Trump video, though, Philip. I mean, that seems to be. You've been in edit tweets, I've been in edit tweets. We know how these things are put together. I can't imagine the process, which would have been twofold, because one, it was an independent company, so they would have done their supposed diligence on it, and then it would have gone to the BBC, who would have looked at it as well. How could this have happened?
Well, indeed, and I think this is why I won't use the word mistake in that case. Somebody sat in the editing suite and they've made an edit knowing what they're doing. The mistake is then how that has been dealt with and how the people have been either brought to boot or not. So that's where the mistake lies, but not in the actual action, and that is reprehensible. What I'm concerned about is the overall reaction to that, and this is something that we need to be very careful of. Trump is now talking about taking legal action against the BBC. We need to talk about there's two elements here. One is the issue about fairness and honesty and deceiving the public. And that clearly was something that deceived the public. That was wrong, and it should be dealt with at a very high level. The resignations, with various other stuff that's happened this year and into the last year, with even members of staff accusing the BBC of bias over coverage of Israel's war in Gaza, the Gaza documentary itself, numerous other things, Greg Wallace. We don't see resignations there. We haven't seen resignations on any of those things, despite there being a pattern. But a powerful man stands up and says, he's very unhappy about all of this, and suddenly we start to see heads roll. And that's where we have to be careful, because if presidents, if powerful people like that can start to kick up a little bit of fuss and then people start to roll over, then we lose the BBC's independence. We lose its credibility as an organisation. And I think that's one thing that we have to be careful of.
OK, on that point, Philip, great to have you on, sir. Thank you. Philip Churn. He is a former BBC journalist. Thanking him. Slightly more defensive of the organisation, but certainly acknowledging some of the brittle nature of what goes on. Is it just the size of the place? Is it that? Is it the brief they have? The phrase, the truth isn't always neutral. There's some truth in that, right? 0344 499 1000. Before we go any further, let's do the voice of doom. Have we got a winner on the voice of doom? This is the mystery voice, but it's political. You're looking for a politician, past or present, dead or alive. Here's the voice.
Rightly and properly.
Who's that then? Some of the guesses we had. Georgia Maloney. Oddly, no. Keith Chegwin. Strangely, it isn't. Ian Duncan-Smith, Brian Warden, Harvey Proctor, Nicholas Soames. No, it's not Francis Pym, Enoch Powell, Malcolm Rifkin or Keith Joseph. We didn't get a winner. It rolls rolls over. It's back tomorrow. Stand by. More of your calls coming next on Talk. Big news coming this December. Our talkTV app is moving to the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. From Monday, 1st of December, the talkTV app will no longer exist, so don't miss out. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
It is Talk. 25 past 3 is the time. Couple of comments from you, Mick. These are ones that have come through to me at Ian Collins UK. You can follow us there. The story of Panorama and the underhand tactics they're using to try to discredit people is not an isolated incident. You just have to look at what they did to Tommy Robinson. Do you understand how devious and corrupt the BBC is? Yeah, that's from years ago now, of course. That was the John Sweeney documentary, which was never aired, interestingly. Then he left the BBC, of course, after all of that. Tom says, I did edit out other words, but if you search for fight in an article about Donald Trump's speech, 20 times he used the word, which is the point I was making, is that you wanted to create an argument that Donald Trump was responsible for creating insurrection on January the 6th. You could do that. You don't need to edit anything. And Andy says, I did some picture editing, Ian, in my time at Midlands Today. I can tell you the edit was well crafted to look seamless, frame by frame, not a quick cut for brevity, sometimes signalled with a white flash. Yeah, exactly right. It's what we do here, not in the same way. I'm talking about different stories here, but you put a white flash in between to indicate that it's moving to something else. And you can do it with sound effects as well if you really want to, more so in radio than you would in pictures. But there's various ways that you could do that. But certainly, if you were just listening to the panorama audio, what you'd hear was a kind of complete sentence that sounds broadly unedited. Interesting times. Nikki, however, in Kent says, there is a sustained push from parts of the right to undermine the BBC, but without the BBC, Britain would be a poorer country. Claims of left-wing bias are overstated. During Brexit, I saw the opposite. The BBC often platformed Brexit advocates with no expertise, while Nigel Farage was an almost permanent presence on Question Time. In a landscape saturated with right-wing broadcasters, the BBC remains one of the few institutions even trying to hold an impartial centre, and is still internationally admired. Trump has shut down any media that shows him in a bad light, a sure sign of authoritarian government. Can you imagine a world of only Fox News, says Nikki in Kent. It rather depends on which programme you watch on Fox News. Some absolute bangers on that channel. But I take the point that Nikki makes, and look, she's right, because I said it right at the beginning. People like Alistair Campbell and goodness knows, so if you look on social media when it comes to coverage of Gaza, they find all of this laughable, some people. They say, what are they talking about? Is Britain going to, or is the BBC going to recognise Israeli genocide, a phrase they haven't used? And that upsets people kind of, typically on the left as to why that would be the case, why they're not doing that. They are therefore pro-Israel. I appreciate you can't win, and the bias game is an interesting one. Robert's in Hertfordshire. What have you got for us, Robert? Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. I did want to tell you a humorous story about my wife's granddad, but before that, the speaker you had, the ex-BBC guy, I don't agree with him whatsoever. Look, at the end of the day, they altered the news. They altered the news. That is the greatest sin.
Well, they altered a documentary rather than the news. I mean, there is a subtle difference.
Yeah, but it was still broadcast under their name.
Oh, 100%, 100%.
You know, you can't do that. Is a mortal sin. You can't do that. There's too many companies doing that. You know, around the world, CNN, and If you're reporting the news, you should not have a political bias at all. You know, correct. You shouldn't have. Anyway, just going on a more humorous note, my wife, me and my wife were coming up to 73, and I started courting her when I was 16. Well, we used to go and visit her nan and granddad, and he had a rule in his house. This is mid 60s, late 60s. Nobody could turn it over from the BBC. No one was allowed to touch the telly.
Yeah.
It was one of them old ones
Sacred.
on radio rental. And we used to have to wait for him to go to bed or go out of the room before we could turn it into ITV, because in them days, it was just ITV and BBC. But that was when, in the days of Richard Dimbleby, and when it was a good state. And when you think back, really, apart from their news, they're responsible for some fantastic programs in the past, but they're going to a point now where it's basically illegal.
It's hard to just, when you've got all these other services that are, it's a choice whether you don't have to have Netflix, but you can pay for it if you want. It becomes hard to kind of defend it, does it? Just on the economic model, it's really hard to defend the BBC.
Well, yeah, you're right. They've got. I mean, it's like everywhere. Politics is creeping into everything in this country, into the unions, into the health service.
Yeah,
it's too much. Something's got to be done about it. And the fact that that Tim Davie resigned is not really good enough. Really, he should have resigned after the festival. I don't think really that's good enough. And if they fine them, they're only going to put it on the on the BBC licence. I feel they should be funded, really, and it should be up to people whether you want to buy it.
Whether you want to buy, whether you want to buy it. No, I get it, Robert. Thank you very much indeed for that. It's a good point. And Tim says, I'm the same age as you when I was a kid. If it's on the BBC, it must be true. Now, if it's on the BBC, it's complete rubbish. And that shouldn't be the case, should it? You shouldn't have to look at the BBC and go, I wonder if... Look, if you watch the 6 o'clock news this evening on the BBC, like most nights, you won't... the bias thing. You might find bias by omission. You might think they should have... Why did they not use this expert? Or why are they not covering that story? Which, as I always say, I get that every day on social media. Why are you not talking about this? Biased media. Call yourself, voice of common sense. You're not talking about this. Well, often we're not talking about it because it's not true. Just because you picked up a meme on flipping Twitter doesn't authenticate the story. Or you've got a clip of one doctor or one former soldier or one former NHS person, whatever the story is, saying something, doesn't mean that therefore the story is true, and you can't stand up the story. I mean, the greatest example, and I have to be careful about this because, of course, there are legal considerations, but when the stabbing on the train happened, there was, within maybe 12, 24 hours, trying to think of the timeline now, images that went around of the alleged perpetrator in other settings. People say, look, here's the picture of the guy. Now, I should add two things here. Number one, I think I saw half a dozen different black men on pictures identified as the person responsible. That kept going around. This is the guy. No, this is the guy. I think I find it's this guy. There was a lot of that happening. But what happened with one of the pictures, which turned out to be a true picture, by the way, people say, why are you not showing this? It's like, well, because you can't. You can stick it on your Facebook account, but a broadcaster can't just say, oh, we think this is the bloke, and then show a picture of a random man without being able to absolutely get that through the process of it being what they call lawyered and authenticated, triple-sourced, etc. Because otherwise, you could be showing a picture of anybody. I mean, on Twitter, it does increasingly matter on Twitter, but you take my point. You can't just mess around with it. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
It is Talk. This from Mick in Walsall, who says the BBC used its credibility to try to frame Trump, knowing that this man would not take it lying down like our politicians. So they should have done the sure thing of not reporting it like it happened. And also, the episode no longer available. So it says it all. Yeah, I'm determined to find that thing. I'm sure is it on YouTube somewhere? I was looking for something the other day that had disappeared from iPlayer. A documentary series from 2008 or something called The Scheme or The Schemes, which essentially was about the schemes being a phrase, if you like, for housing estates for people who are not, I was about to say working class people. That doesn't really cover it, but it probably does in some regions, but mainly a Scottish term. And it followed like half a dozen families that were, had their own struggles with, previous drug addiction and things like that, all sorts of things. It's no longer on iPlayer, but somebody had lobbed it somewhere on a website. I haven't watched it again yet to be seen. So maybe that Trump one is still out there. We'll watch with interest. We'll also keep an eye on wastage, which we love to keep you abreast of. And there's quite a lot of it going on at the moment. We are aware, of course, of the council in Blackpool Council that splashed out £35,500 on 6 Pride-themed zebra crossings. So they took the old black and white zebra crossing, iconic, if you like, replicated all over the world with the Belisha beacons, and they decided what we'll do to be groovy and down with the kids, we'll put a pride flag on it as well. So it's a zebra crossing with a rainbow, essentially. It cost them £35,500. Not private money, council taxpayers' money. This is a council that is 570 million quid in debt. That, frankly, is a crime scene of public wastage. And whoever gave that the green light should be repaying the £35,500. Let's get a word from Councillor Charlotte Hill, Cabinet Member for Potholes, Highways and Transport, a Reform Member for Melbourne and Woodville in South Derbyshire. Good afternoon to you, Charlotte. Nice to have you with us. I mean, it is one of those stories that in any other day of the week you'd say, no, that's not true, someone made that up. I mean, if you want to spend £35,500 when you've got billions in the bank, well, maybe go nuts. But frankly, when you're 570 million in debt, this is obscene.
It is, Ian, and it's something that we now know Labour are so wasteful with their spending. And I keep saying that it's not about how much you earn, but it's actually about what you do with what you earn. And in Derbyshire County Council, we have been streamlining our services so that we don't cut services to residents, but we actually do better with what we've got. So already in 6 months, we've made a 4.2 million savings just in highways. And things like this just make us sick, because the Labour government and the Labour councils, they're just unapologetically wasting council taxpayers' money, while Reform are working across our councils to make sure that we deliver for our residents, and we also streamline the spending as well as.
Yeah, I mean, it's not... I appreciate running budgets is, not everybody's cup of tea, and I don't dispute the challenges that councils have. But there are certain obvious things. You might think the moment, somebody walked into the council meeting and said, I've got a great idea for the zebra crossings, someone would have gone, okay, tell us your idea then, Bob. And then Bob wheels out the idea. And everybody in the room went, great, thanks for your input, Bob. Get out, mate, because you've got no place in a expenditure meeting. I mean, you might think that would have happened, but instead somebody said, that's a good idea.
Well, you'd hope so. And the amount of red tape that is also in local government and any public sector as well, you would hope that that red tape would have stopped something like this. And I think it shows that our public organisations don't want to stop something like this, Ian, as well. When Reform arrived and took control of Derbyshire County Council, it was such an officer-led organisation previously, and we've really had to work to shake that up. We've had to be involved in things that they're not used to councillors being involved with, and that's something that, as Reformers, we're not just going to nod our heads and say yes, but we're actually going to push back. And that's something that I don't think any public sector is used to elected officials doing. But that's what Reform have been elected to do, shake things up.
Indeed. Can you promise residents who live within a Reform jurisdiction, in this case, Charlotte, that they won't have to wait 103 years to have potholes refilled? Because that's certainly what one council are talking about here. What's going on?
It is so crazy. I mean, Oxfordshire Lib Dem Council, they clearly cannot deliver for their residents. Whereas something that we're bringing forward in our next cabinet meeting on Thursday is that we will actually be reducing the amount of time in between annual inspections on highways by 3 years. So in Reform-led councils, your roads will be inspected a lot sooner as well. But since May, we've actually filled in 28,000 potholes as well. So we have around 2,000 potholes outstanding now. So hopefully this time next year, Derbyshire won't actually have any potholes either.
So in terms of waiting 103 years, you're quite confident you can beat you can beat that prediction?
Definitely, and it's something that in Derbyshire as well, we have such a different geography. We've got the high peaks, and then we've got South Derbyshire. There's so many hills, and the way Derbyshire is built up is so different. But it's something that we have a service that we have to run, and it's something we'll get round to it eventually, even though we've got a gorgeous county.
And another story here, just a final one on this, Charlotte. 98% of councils report fly tipping, 70% deem it a major problem. Half saw incidents rise last year, but also half of councils, 54%, believe they'll never get on top of the issue. I mean, this is a huge blight, right?
It is, and it's something that maybe our One Derbyshire proposal that we're putting forward to government, where we can see local government streamlined and local government reformed. We can see the services delivered under one umbrella. It's so stagnated at local government level, where we have districts and boroughs and counties. No one knows which councillor works where, and if we can streamline that under one umbrella, then maybe these services might be easier to deliver. But also, we need harsher sentencing for the people that actually commit these offences.
Yeah, it's a pretty mucky way to earn a living, isn't it? Just by dropping old cack in the middle of the motorway or in the side of a bush or whatever. But, you know, plenty of people give it a go. It's surprising what you can see on a hard shoulder these days. You're meant to see a broken down car, but I increasingly see double beds and washing machines.
Well, yes.
The last thing you want to see on your journey on the way on holiday. Charlotte, thank you very much indeed for your time. Really appreciate that. Councillor Charlotte Hill, she's a Reform member for Melbourne and Woodville Council in South Derbyshire. Thank you to her. 3:45, back to your calls. This will be Nick. He's down in London on the BBC. Nick, what have you got for us?
Yes, hi. Thank you for having me on.
Pleasure.
The reason I was calling, I want to give this debate a clear, factual and unarguable example of institutional BBC bias.
Okay.
And this goes back a little while to the Leave referendum.
Yep.
And after the Brexit referendum, when majority obviously voted in favour of Brexit, I watched Question Time, and there was not one single episode where Leave supporters were on the majority of the panel. The panel is usually 4 people. And the BBC only ever had one supporter at most. Sometimes there were none, but usually had one, outnumbered by 3 Remain supporters. And this is simply not reflective of the vote of the population.
Wasn't it based on the fact that, not here to defend anyone on this, Nick, but wasn't it based on the fact that Question Time isn't a Brexit programme, it's a general programme for lots of different subjects. So they represent political parties, not where individuals stand on one issue, because yes, they would talk about Brexit disproportionately at that time, but they would also talk about abortion and welfare.
Yes, they spoke about Brexit, as you point out, on almost every programme, every episode had a question about Brexit. It was the debate du jour, wasn't it? It was the prime topic of conversation, of discussion. But the point is that yes, you're saying that they've got to reflect other things, but the point is they weren't reflective. The people that they chose, even if they had Conservatives on, they weren't Conservatives who supported Brexit. They were Conservative Remainers. And if they had a journalist on, because usually the way it works is they have a couple of 2 or 3 politicians and somebody else who might be a journalist or an academic or maybe an actor or something like that. And they never chose one of these non-politician people on the panel who was a supporter supporter of Brexit. They were every single episode, as I say, every single one. The Leave supporters were in the minority.
Yeah, I get it, and it does become incredibly, particularly it's a subject that you want to hear more about. It becomes a bit of a problem. 0344 499 1000. More from you on the way. Thank you to Nick down in London. June 22nd, 2023, there was a Brexit special with an audience of just Leave voters. By the way, I should just add a Brexit special with an audience of Leave voters. A panel of Leavers and Remainers were asked about, in addition to, obviously, Brexit, cost of living crisis, immigration, and whether voters were deceived over Brexit. I think that was the BBC going, well, we've been accused of this, so we better do this. Does that in any way satisfy those that see the bias, particularly over Brexit? Although, as I keep saying, Alistair Campbell saw it as a pro-Brexit organisation. He kind of renamed it the British Brexit Corporation. So what do you do with that information? 0344 499 1000. This is Talk. Big news coming this December. Our talkTV app is moving to the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. From Monday, 1st of December, the talkTV app will no longer exist, so don't miss out. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
So much on the BBC. Man alive, we've got loads of... Obviously, this will trickle into various other stories over the coming days as well. Lots of issues around the BBC. I mean, would you... If it was subscription-based, would you pay for it? I mean, we'll be looking into that as well. Simon in Skelmersdale says, disgraced BBC bosses finally fall on their sword, but even in their resignations, forced, there is a breathtaking level of defiance and arrogance. They still fail to understand the magnitude of the reputational damage caused to the BBC, which simply can no longer be trusted. That's a brilliant observation. It's so true. When Deborah Turnbull says, well, you know, we're not biased, I mean, yeah, I know there's nobody stands up there every morning and dictates how news stories have to be put together. We all know that, if you think about it. That's not really what's meant by the bias. Works in sort of other, slightly more mysterious and maybe underhand ways. But to not acknowledge the magnitude of it, and I think Simon uses that word, magnitude of the reputational damage caused to the BBC. The BBC's public funding should have ensured it was transparent, impartial, robustly open to scrutiny. The decision to begin shaping the news instead of reporting it whilst fostering a culture of institutional bias will finally sound the death knell for Auntie. It should now be sold and take its chances in the very competitive independent broadcasting market. TV licence payers should not have to continue to fund the BBC while it embarks on a journey of soul-searching and journalistic rehabilitation, just no longer fit for purpose. And one of the problems broadcasters face, and it doesn't affect us here, but I think Sky News are probably a good example, who may well be taking over ITV. It's going to be interesting how that pans out. Sky News said, you've got to almost, if you want to make your mark, you've got to remain impartial, but also do something that marks you out. Now, if you wanted to, you know, the criticism the BBC often get is it's quite boring on the eye. It's quite boring because it's just, there's no the word isn't showbiz, but there's no kind of sense of it marking itself out visually in audio terms, very straight-laced. And that, by the way, is the point. But in the current world we live in, appetites have changed and people want something that is slightly different. So Sky News have tried all sorts of things, getting presenters to walk around the newsroom while reading the news, big sets, different colours, different teams, etc. They've kind of gone through all of that, and it's a bid to try and, you know, find a niche and try and find an audience. So I know it's difficult. I know it's really hard in the commercial sector to try and, you know, make money out of news. But the BBC, to stay relevant, need viewers and listeners. So they've kind of also playing a bit of a, you know, how can we make this look cool? How can we make it look more relevant? So they're attempting all of that, and, you know, you try to please everybody, you please nobody. Matt's in Cheshire. What have you got, Matt? Afternoon to you.
Hi, very good afternoon, Ian.
Hi.
Everything you just said about them having to try loads of things is because you and another channel have snatched away everything from them, and you've all got personality without having to spend hundreds of thousands of pounds on sets.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I've just got a few odds and sods.
Although the backdrop behind me cost about 120,000, apparently, just for the record.
You better get a new jacket then, Ian, just to fit in with it or something like that. Yeah. BBC political programming is even more biased than the news, which we've not discussed. And the political program is the pits, and it's never been the same since Andrew Neil left. So the only hope is that Andrew Neil goes back and sacks everybody he needs to sack. BBC Salford is more or less a Labour campaign hub, and Andy Burnham spends more time there than he does in his mayoral office.
I think he's got an office there, hasn't he?
It pretty much has, yeah. And the BBC is wedded to international institutions like the UN, the WHO, the EU, and by that alone, they obviously favour the Labour Party. BBC News thinks it's the world's news first and forgets it.
Do they, when it comes to things like the EU, is it for the BBC? Because some would say it was not for the BBC to question the EU and the existence of it, because the EU is there. Let's say when we were part of it. So we're part of it, so therefore, you know, that's not a debate in the news. That we just report what's happening in the EU, not whether the existence of the EU is the right thing to do. I hear what you're saying. Listen, Matt, I've got to move for no other reason than Peter Cardwell has just walked into the room, and that's usually a good thing.
Not always.
Yeah, star of BBC News now as well. Clock you on there.
Yeah, I was on last night. We're going to be playing a bit of that actually on the show in a few minutes' time.
You're playing yourself on the BBC?
Myself on the BBC, yeah.
How did this happen?
I think my ego has just exploded.
That's right. Yeah, I just happened to clock that as well.
Yeah. No, it was...
The beans on toast went everywhere when I saw that.
Well, I can imagine, yeah. No, they asked me to go on, and I went on the BBC News channel last night.
The thing is, you've worked
home truths.
Yeah, you've worked for the BBC. Yeah. You did put a very, very intelligent and robust set of points to them.
First time for everything, yeah.
I think it did, yeah, and last as well. But no, I thought it was the points you were making were very reasonable, and they need to be made.
Yeah, and they're in crisis today. President Trump threatening to sue them for $1 billion. That's a big story we're going to be talking about right throughout the programme today. Also, Rachel Reeves admitting that taxes will rise. I mean, we all knew it was going to happen, but she has now finally said it. And another one-in, one-out migrant comes back. The scheme just isn't working, and some of the things that the government are saying is that it is working in their opinion, and that shows it's working.
How
because
do you
that person
get straight back?
Deported again.
Does it not cost about $3,000 to get back?
Well, you would wonder where this money comes from, certainly. So the person gets deported to France. We know that there's basically no security. Those people can come and go as they please. Yeah. They get back to Calais and then come back. This is now the second person since the scheme started a few weeks ago who's come back onto our shores.
Right. But nobody is addressing how they paid for it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we don't know.
I mean, it doesn't cost you. It's not like a 20 quid return.
No, exactly. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money.
I mean, it's a few quid.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, we'll ask the questions in all of that, but certainly this scheme isn't working. The government says it is working because it's deterring people. I'm not sure how many people it's actually deterring.
There were a few days, there were about 11 days, I think, when nobody crossed the channel because the weather was shocking.
Yes.
And it was stormy and windy and rainy.